Well, good morning. Welcome to the California Department of Motor Vehicles Public Workshop on Autonomous Vehicles. I'm Bernard Soriano. I'm the Deputy Director for Policy at the DMV. And I'm joined here at the table with my colleagues from the DMV, as well as from the California Highway Patrol. To my left is Miguel Acosta, Chief of the DMV's Autonomous Vehicles. And to my right are Assistant Chief Mark Hedrick from the CHP's Enforcement and Planning Division. And to his right is Captain Nick Doko, who is the commander of the CHP's Commercial Vehicle Section. Collectively, the four of us will be conducting this public workshop. And I'd like to stress that this is a workshop, as opposed to a public hearing being conducted as part of a formal rulemaking process. So at this time, comments will not be transcribed nor entered into any future rulemaking record. And the department will not provide a formal response to the comments received in this workshop. However, this discussion will help inform what an autonomous vehicle rulemaking would look like. Our primary focus is on the safe testing and operation of autonomous vehicles and the safety of the public who will share the road with these vehicles. Today's session is being recorded and will be available on the DMV's website shortly after today's event. We want this to be an interactive session. We want to hear from you, the stakeholders, on what we should consider. We recognize there are unique safety, inspection, enforcement, and permitting considerations with autonomous vehicles. And your input today will help inform us of the various issues surrounding autonomous vehicle technology, including the heavy-duty vehicle space. So please feel free to provide us your thoughts on these topics. Today's event is being live broadcast on 2 different platforms, on YouTube and Facebook Live, and folks from around the globe are listening in. We welcome everyone participating remotely. For those of you that are participating remotely, you have the opportunity to also provide comments, although there will not be an opportunity for real-time virtual interaction with the 4 of us. For those of you watching our live streams, if you do wish to provide input during the workshop, we ask that you do so by sending an email to autonomousvehicles@dmv.ca.gov. Again, autonomous vehicles, one word, @dmv.ca.gov. Please do that rather than commenting on the live stream platforms. We have staff members that will be monitoring the inbox and will alert us to incoming comments, but we may not be able to share all of them as they come up. Before we begin, some housekeeping and logistics. Restrooms are in the lobby beyond security, and also in the lobby are copies of today's agenda. On the agenda is a QR code that takes you to the current California autonomous vehicle regulations. We will follow this agenda closely. You'll see that it is broken up into distinct topics, and we want to focus on each topic separately. For example, the first topic is heavy-duty autonomous vehicle operational restrictions. Please limit your comments to that subject. We may have clarifying questions and want to make sure we accurately capture the issue before moving on to the next comment. If you have comments on other items, please save those for the appropriate time. If you wish to provide more comments, please form a line, or if you wish to provide comments, please form a line behind the podium. In order to get all of the topics on our agenda, we ask that each speaker limit their comments to 2 minutes per topic. We'll have a timer, and so you'll see it count down. Our questions will come after the 2 minutes are up. The agenda is very robust, and we anticipate taking a mid-morning break and a lunch break. We anticipate concluding by mid-afternoon, but we will go as long as needed. We want to develop regulations that address the safe operation of autonomous vehicles, foster innovation, provide economic opportunity, and address equality and equity. And we want these regulations to work for you. This is your opportunity to help provide input as we work to develop these regulations. And with that, let's get started. Please form a line behind the podium if you wish to provide comments on the first agenda item, which is heavy-duty AV operational restrictions. Go ahead. And as you provide the comments, please state your name and your affiliation so we can properly record this.
Good morning.
Yes.
Good morning. My name is Ariel Wolf. I'm General Counsel to the Autonomous Vehicle Industry Association. I'm here also speaking on behalf of the California Alliance for Freight Innovation. It's an organization of many companies and entities across California that are focused on trying to bring the benefits and the safety gains from autonomous trucking to the state. I'll express at the outset a thank you for convening this workshop, and we look forward to continued engagement on this issue in the many months and years to come. Now, on the issue of heavy-duty autonomous vehicle operational restrictions, let me make a couple of overview comments. The first is that any limitations on commercial autonomous vehicles in the state of California should be based on safety, that is the focus of this proceeding, and that should be what the focus is on any restrictions. And so to the extent that the DMV and CHP implement certain restrictions, there should also be a clear path to lifting those restrictions. Any such restrictions in the future should be lifted based on measurements on safety. Now, I'll just note that although those kinds of restrictions are not necessary or typical in other states, we would be happy to work with the DMV and the CHP to provide examples of approaches a few other states have taken that perhaps are helpful here. Just say that when it comes to this topic on operational restrictions, it's going to be in the details. It's going to depend on what's put forward. For example, restrictions on transporting hazardous materials should be limited to, for example, placarded hazmat to avoid impacting household goods more broadly. We don't want to over-capture things and end up having a problem with that we didn't intend. I'd also say that any restriction on transporting passengers, it really should be limited to transporting passengers for compensation. Again, part of that not expanding the scope too broadly and having unintended consequences. And I'll let others speak to some of the other things. For example, we have concerns with restricting double trailers and so forth. And as I said earlier, it would be important that any movement forward in this area does have a sunset or a pathway to lifting these restrictions once the safety proves itself, which the technology will do. With that, I'll step away. Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Aiden Ali Sullivan, representing Waymo. I'd like to first thank the department and the California Highway Patrol for holding this public workshop. We appreciate the work that both agencies have done as we continue to explore opportunities within this space. Regarding the first topic, heavy-duty AV operational restrictions. In general, Waymo believes that the existing regulatory framework in California can easily accommodate the safe operation of heavy-duty autonomous vehicles with just a few surgical changes to the regulations. The same core principles apply to all autonomous vehicles, both light-duty and heavy-duty, and everything in between. We think the existing structure under the current California Vehicle Code is largely workable for HD vehicles with minimal changes, and that operational restrictions for heavy-duty vehicles are not necessary from a technical standpoint. If the department were to contemplate limitations, including HD passenger movement, hazardous materials, oversized loads, etc., these would not impact our proposed business operations, which right now are focused on the middle mile, would not impact us in the near or medium-term future, as again, we continue to focus on long-haul goods movement as the core trucking business. We do not believe that any restriction should be based on an assumption or a belief that commercial AVs are less safe than a human-driven truck that engages in these same types of activities. On to the second subject, IEB. Can we touch on that as well? Perfect. Regarding potential limitations when the following conditions are present, so construction zones, rolling crash zones, etc. We recognize that safely navigating construction zones, road closures, and crash scenes is essential for all commercial autonomous vehicles. We also recognize that in many cases, these types of road conditions are known in advance and may last for extended periods of time. In many cases, when and where possible, with that prior notice, we're able to adjust operations to accommodate these changes. However, it's imperative that autonomous vehicles are able to fully handle any and all complex road conditions, including road conditions known in advance and dynamic or unexpected conditions like crash scenes. We do not believe it would be feasible to restrict AV operations when these contemplated conditions are present for a variety of reasons. First, operating in these conditions is necessary for commercial AV operations. In most heavy-duty operations, we envision freeway driving, operations that are really less amenable to simply moving a street or block over, as one can do with light-duty rideshare operations in cases of accidents or closure situations. In contemplated heavy-duty freeway driving, it would be less feasible to reroute. Further, it's unclear how the presence of dynamic in-the-moment conditions like crashes could be tracked or noticed to AV operators in a way that enables this kind of restriction.
Aiden, we have a 2-minute limit. The mic's gonna cut off in a second here.
Apologies, yep. Or how any type of restriction would be enforced effectively.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you. Any questions? No? Okay. Yep, go ahead, next.
Good morning. My name is Nat Buse. I'm the Chief Safety Officer at Aurora. And first of all, I wanted to thank the DMV and CHP for holding this important workshop. Having worked at the federal level for nearly 2.5 decades before my current gig, I truly appreciate the work and the hard work that it is to write regulations, having written many myself. I think this issue really comes down to why are we working on this in the first place, which is safety, with over 5,000 Americans being killed every year with heavy truck crashes. But more specifically, wanted to address maybe 2 topics in the questions. The first is around the limitations of how you would restrict operations. You know, from a safety case perspective, which is what Aurora is pursuing, many of the things that are in there are part of deciding whether your safety case is actually closed or not. So it's not an a priori thing that you just kind of go out there and say you can do these things. You actually have to decide within your safety case if you can actually do them. I think when you think about some of the work that was done previously on transporting passengers, for example, in a lot of cases you just can't mirror that scenario on top of commercial vehicles because they're just completely different. And in fact, some of our customers, we'll call them, actually want to engage in certain pilots with us that might prohibit. On the issue of, very specifically on construction zones and things like that, you know, it's really important to point out that we can't design a vehicle that cannot handle those situations from a safety perspective. Crashes are dynamic. They can literally happen right in front of the truck. And if you are relying on a countermeasure that relies on some sort of detection up the road in a dynamic event like that, it's liable not to be very effective. And so the truck has to be able to detect those and be able to navigate those scenes. Now, would it make it easier from an uptime, let's say, from the product perspective? Of course, but that's not what we're really talking about here today. It's really about the fundamental safety aspects of the vehicle. I think the other thing that's worth pointing out about both of those 2 pieces that I mentioned is, you know, there is a larger federal framework that's also being worked on at this very moment. And so these processes all have to fit together. You know, there still is an obligation for manufacturers who put vehicles on the road to not create an unreasonable risk to safety, right? That is by clear in the statute. You just can't put crappy equipment on the road, basically. And then you also have the operational footprint of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration that sits on top of that. So my time is up, but look forward to continuing to engage in very constructive conversation. This is really important for the country, and it's really important for the citizens of the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Buse, I did have a follow-up question.
Sure.
You used a double negative, and I just want to make sure I capture that correctly. You said you cannot design to not sense a construction zone. Is that what you said?
Correct. As part of understanding your operational design domain, you cannot say that you won't have crashes in it, for example. And so the truck has to be able to detect a crash scene, and if a crash occurs right in front of it, and take the appropriate action.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Okay.
Great.
Thank you. No comments? Okay. Any other comments? Please.
Oh, is this the button here? Oh, whatever. Anyways, hi.
Name and affiliation?
Mike Devaney, Teamsters Local 70 Sergeant at Arms and truck driver here in the state of California. Like the others, I appreciate you guys opening this forum today, and I appreciate the fact that the first two speakers mentioned the word safety briefly one time. That was very nice, and the last gentleman did talk about it quite a bit, and I appreciate that, and the admission they can't quite capture everything. Now, what these trucks, to be honest, there's a lot we don't know. In fact, it's more that we don't know than we know. As a driver who has a safe record, I followed the curriculum that the DMV set. You guys certified me 29 years ago. I have a safe record. I've driven all over this state and all over this nation. And I can tell you from a driver's perspective, there's things that people would get that a truck, I don't care how smart it is, wouldn't quite get. Trucks don't have intuition, empathy. Trucks aren't going to look a mile down the road like I've been trained to by you to see hazards that are coming, things that could happen. But to the Smith system, it works brilliantly when you use it. I've had a steering tire blow out, and it was all I could do at speed not to cross 3 full lanes before I got that truck under control. And thank God nobody was hurt, because I grabbed it immediately and knew what to do. I didn't jam on the brakes. I knew what to do. Load shift, binders brake. There's talk of hazmat being in these trucks. It's frightening to me. Now, and this is coming from a guy who's played by the rules, who went through the training. I go through recertification every year as far as Smith system and safety goes. And you might want to say it's easy to say, well, he's just protecting Teamster jobs. Well, sure, that's part of it. But we're talking thousands of jobs, coast to coast. And the most important part is safety. The jobs will be there. I'm worried about the safety of the road. My family's on the road. Your families are on the road. And at this point, this is so new. There's so much that we don't know. And again, in the first two speakers, were really interested in how soon the restrictions could be released and the qualifications for that. I think that's very telling. They didn't speak much about safety. And as a Teamster, that's my job. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. Any other comments?
I actually have a question for the previous speaker,
Yeah, sorry.
if you could. So you a couple times you mentioned there's so much that you don't know, and I understand that that's probably the case because you're saying it. What would you want to know, or what do you need to know? So you're saying there's a lack of information. What information are you seeking?
Well, I mean, the unknowns and the unpredictable highway. I think everybody in this room, everybody up there could certainly agree that at some point, somebody has just swerved for no reason and almost hit you, and you've seen their phone in their hand. Clearly, we see it all the time. These are things we can't bank on when they're going to happen, but we know they will happen. And it's more about awareness. It's more about your training and your experience. I can't expect digital code to know these things. I mean, sure, you could say, hey, if you see this in front of you, do this, do that. Okay, fine, that's coding. But it's the things that happen out of the blue that make no sense, that, things happen, horrible things happen. And you need somebody with quick responses to understand and assess the situation that's been in it before. Black ice. What's a truck going to do going over the Sierra with black ice? I can tell you what it's going to do. It's going to go spiraling and hit somebody. At some point, sadly, there's going to be a shortcoming in the coding, because that's the nature of coding. I have friends that are programmers, I get it. You have to refine these things over and over and over. And the testing ground is not the roads of California. It's not. I'm all for testing. I love technology. I think we need, the DMV, the drivers, everybody, we need to embrace coming technology. Absolutely. I don't think we couldn't stop it if we wanted. But the place to have these dangerous and potentially deadly mistakes is not the road. People are going to remember these conversations that AB 316 would have helped. I'm not trying to dominate your time. If I've answered your question, please let me know.
No, you have, and I appreciate your response.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Hey, how you doing? My name is Brian Marshall. I'm a local driver for Recology, proud member of Local 350 Teamsters for a number of years. I've been a driver since 1990, over 33 years, working anywhere from San Francisco to Oakland to Hollister, Gilroy, San Mateo, San Carlos, everywhere in between. I've driven 80,000-pound vehicles. I've driven 10,000-pound vehicles over the years. There's a lot of variables when you're driving, like the previous speaker said. Applaud that. With the variables that come along with everyday driving, like you said, people that are on their phones, when you have rain, you have sleet, you have slick, depending on what state you live in, depending on what the situations are, fog, etc. We've all seen the cars, the autonomous vehicles around in like San Mateo, San Francisco. A lot of times they don't know where we're going, you know. It takes somebody sitting in the driver's seat to be able to act in an instance, almost when you're taking the time, when you take your DMV test, like I'm a Class A commercial driver, when you take your Class B or Class A test, there's always somebody sitting with you in case there's an emergency to be able to hit the brakes to steer around something. That's just to take your test, you know. Now you want to have an autonomous vehicle, do Amazon deliveries, to do, you know, taxis, to do different things with in and out of the cities. That's putting regular pedestrians in harm's way when it comes to stuff. I think over the years you start to learn as a commercial driver the ins, the outs of what's important. I want to keep my family safe. We want to keep everybody in here safe. We want to protect jobs, but it's about the safety of the pedestrians, the safety of the individuals, to be able to maintain fire, emergency apparatus throughout the system. I don't want to take up a bunch of your time. I just want to let you know that we're all together in one voice. I took a day off from work because I feel that it's that important today to come and speak and march and let you guys know why all of us are here.
Thank you. There you go.
I just pushed this button here.
Before you start, I think that button's for the media. I think your button's on the base of the mic.
Okay.
Yeah, it's already on.
Okay. All right. My name is Juanita Smith. I'm here as a Teamster 853 representative, but I'm also representing for pedestrians and mothers and children that will be on the road. I have a 14-year-old little girl. She soon will be on the road, and I have a lot of anxiety and worries about her. There's experienced drivers out there, and there's inexperienced drivers. And to think that there would be a large 18-foot truck on the road and not be able to notice an inexperienced driver and know how to protect the self and the pedestrian alarms me. I'm also a hazmat certified worker, and I'm aware of all of the chemicals that'll be in the back of the truck. And if they are combined, what can happen? It kind of alarms me that that they're quick to put these vehicles on the road without a proper human being there to relate to the human beings on the road and also to relate to circumstances that happen as a driver. Some things are circumstantial. That's about it. I'm not trying to take too much time, but I think it's important for you to hear from workers and pedestrians and get an insight of our worries before putting these vehicles on the road. Thank you.
Mrs. Smith.
Just as a reminder to others who are coming up to please stick to the item that's listed there. We're talking about potential restrictions and those bullets that are beneath it. I get it that everybody wants to talk about safety, but if you could stick to those comments, we're going to move through this as fast as we can. We seem to have gotten a little bit off track with the very specific topic that's there.
Sure. My name is Marcos Escobar. I'm the field director for the California Labor Federation. We represent more than 2 million workers that do over 100 different jobs. One thing that all of our jobs have in common, all of our members have in common, is a concern about occupational safety. That's why I'm here today. All of our members use California roads, not just the ones who turn a key for a living. so this issue affects everyone we represent. Autonomous vehicles are quickly becoming one of the state's most pressing public safety issues. Their expansion should be left up to regulatory agencies, should not be left up to regulatory agencies like the DMV and CPUC. Not only do these agencies know next to nothing about public safety, but they're in the pocket of big tech. In fact, CPUC Commissioner John Reynolds served as the managing counsel for Cruise prior to his appointment. The DMV and CPUC are likely trying to rush the expansion of AVs to cater to their tech friends. But this technology needs significantly more rigorous testing, and the safety of AVs needs to be carefully evaluated by experts, not regulatory agencies. Our members and millions of California drivers who will be on the road next to autonomous trucks also deserve a voice in this process. This is about their safety. That's why the expansions of AVs should be determined by our elected officials who represent the voices of millions of Californians. Agencies like the DMV and CPUC lack the same level of transparency and accountability that the legislative body has, which is clearly why big tech is trying to go through them and have them make the rules. There are some real questions about the capabilities of this agency. By making new rules on autonomous vehicles, the California DMV wants us to trust them with implementing high-risk, cutting-edge technology that could have completely upend our state's economy and potentially destroy thousands of middle-class jobs. This is the same agency that has IT infrastructure plagued by long wait times and system outages, only began updating their infrastructure 2 years ago, and is still at least 1 year away from completing any updates. That's according to the DMV director. This is the same agency that hit California residents with fees because it accidentally failed to process e-checks. This is the same agency that mishandled 23,000 voter registrations right before the 2018 midterm elections. This is the same agency that couldn't implement Real ID protocols that complied with federal standards. And now the DMV wants us to trust them with our safety, during a process whereby it will allow a giant metal box that weighs more than 5...
Your 2 minutes is up. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Appreciate it.
Any more comments? Okay.
Hello, I'm James Pelican, a UPS driver in Half Moon Bay. And I just wanted to speak to the human aspect that I'm scared might disappear. I imagine an autonomous vehicle driving around town, delivering packages eventually, and where's the person? Where's the community? Is this robot gonna feed the dogs treats? Is the customer gonna come out and give a bottle of water to the autonomous vehicle? Where's the connection and the humanity? I'm just asking that question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning to all of you. My name is Megan Adams. I'm the president of Smart Local 1741, representing the school bus drivers here in San Francisco. I've been a commercial driver for 14 years and a school bus driver for nearly 8 here in the city. I know that it was highlighted about the fact that people have been saying the word safety a lot, but I'm not just, for everybody who was talking about how rigorous the training is that they go through with the DMV. I also additionally, as a school bus driver, go through with the CHP is the one who does my testing, and the CDE that requires me to go through regular training and recertifying every 5 years. Safety is very, very important to us. We're professional drivers. This is what our passion is, and why so many people have said that they've done this for decades, that this is a lifelong thing that we commit ourselves to, and which is why safety is so important to us. I transport children, but they also transport so much cargo that's so vital to all of this. And so that's why us really coming up here and talking about the importance of safety is, we just had a rally and listened to the fire the president of the Union for Firefighters here in San Francisco talk about the issues that they have with just the autonomous cars, those vehicles that are much smaller than what you're talking about, running into fire scenes, running into emergency situations. We don't have that under control. How can we even start talking about doing something that is so much bigger than just a car? You're talking about trucks. And I'm worried personally as a bus driver about what that could mean, that if we start opening up for trucks, what does that mean for our buses? And you know, I've driven special needs children for 8 years now. I worry, you know, for talking about the human aspect, about making sure that we stay connected to our passengers. And I've been here and I've listened to the Teamsters talk about it before up in Sacramento, about the incredible things that, because they commit their lives to being part of this, about the safety, like the evasions and helping save lives that they have done out on the road. So I know that we've talked about it a lot, but I want to highlight that's how important this is to us, that the lives of the pedestrians, the people behind the wheel, all of us matter, and that's why we put this as foremost. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adams.
Buenos días.
¿Cómo
morning.
está?
My name is Roberto Hernandez, and I'm here representing the Mission District here in San Francisco. It's really hard for me to share with you that recently we had a drive-by shooting on 24th and Treat Street, where 9 innocent people were hit with bullets, sprayed with bullets. It was on a Friday night. I'll never forget it. I was actually going home with my wife, and I got a text, and I immediately went over there. And one of these automated cars got stuck right in the corner of where this incident happened. And the ambulance weren't able to get through. The police department weren't able to get through. It got stuck. Thank God that nobody died. Thank God that there were so many people right there at that moment, from nurses to everyday folk that knew what to do to take care of the individuals who had gotten shot. That's not the first time that I have witnessed that. We organized an event called Carnival San Francisco, Chinese New Year's Parade, recently at Pride Parade. These vehicles, there's a barricade, they get stuck, they don't move. I have 7 children, 17 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. We play out on the street, because I grew up playing out on the street. I got a little basketball hoop in front of my house. We played soccer. We played tag. We played a lot of games out on the street. And I can tell you, I am so fearful of these vehicles. They get stuck. And so I can't even imagine an 80,000-ton truck rolling through my barrio.
Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move on to the next topic. The next topic is phased autonomous vehicle permitting process and data reporting. And some of the things that we'd like to hear from you are about, because many of you mentioned, the safety aspect as well as the human aspect, we'd like to hear your thoughts on testing with the safety driver, any requirements that we would need, thresholds, things of that nature. So please share your thoughts. For example, a concept would be, if we were to have a safety driver in an autonomous vehicle, a heavy-duty autonomous vehicle as part of testing, should there be restrictions on the licensing of that safety driver? For example, should they have a valid CDL over 5 years or something like that? So we just ponder that, and if you have any comments with regard to testing with a safety driver, thresholds, metrics, things of that nature, please feel free to comment. And again, please state your name when you approach the podium. Go ahead.
Hi again, Ariel Wolf with California Alliance for Freight Innovation. I'm going to take just a second to respond to something before, and then I'll just quickly touch on this topic here. Once again, I'll just say, on behalf of industry and many stakeholders representing millions of California employees and residents, we're grateful for all the feedback and input in this public workshop. What I'll also say is, on behalf of all of those, including folks, victims of crashes and families, no one has a monopoly on frustration and concern with respect to this process. The reality is that it's been 11 years since legislation was passed that effectively prohibited autonomous trucking from being on the road because the regulations didn't come out until 2018, and that prohibited trucking explicitly. So now it's 2023. And I think it's fair to say that no matter how this process ensues, it'll be some time, maybe years, before driverless autonomous trucking is on the roads in California. So 14 years, how long is too long? Just specifically speaking to the idea that this is some sort of rushed process. We're talking about getting to closer to the 2-decade mark before this technology is permitted to be on the roads in California. And that's while other states have started with rigorous oversight to allow it to take place. So that's just something to correct the record, and I once again say that there's a sense of urgency on our part, on industry's part, to deal with tremendous safety problems on the roads in partnership with all of the phenomenal drivers that are here today and elsewhere. So this is something that we care about deeply. Now, with just 10 seconds left, I'll just note, and I'll reserve some time after others are able to speak, that with respect to training, we ask that the training protocols be the same as in the light-duty context, that a singular training protocol or qualification is unlikely to be practical across autonomous trucking industry due to the variety of operational models and technological systems used by companies operating AV trucks, and particularly with the 10,000-pound threshold with and without CDLs. So there may be more to say on that. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf.
Good morning. Steve
morning.
Beck, Principal Officer of Local 853, representing over 14,000 members. Many of my members are liquor drivers. Many of them are drivers here in this city of San Francisco. As far as we're talking about safety, we're talking about regulations, we're talking about what can we do to make this a safer industry. I want to talk about how having a driverless vehicle would regulate how our drivers drive in San Francisco. We have places like Tenderloin, 3rd Street, certain places where we have to force companies to put 2 men in that truck. It's not because of the safety on the road. It's not because of the safety of, can I get from point A to point B? It's, can I make that delivery safely to that location, right? How is this autonomous vehicle going to show up in an area? The back door is going to open. How's that product going to get from point A to point B? That product's going to go from point A to truck A, and that truck A is going to drive away with that product. There's nobody there to regulate helping that product get into that store or helping protect the driver. So that's why we send out vehicles with 2 drivers, because we're trying to protect the customer, the product, the people on the street, the pedestrians, the store owner. That's why being able to regulate these things and testing and safety, that's why that's all important. It's not important simply because somebody wants to line their pockets or somebody wants to do a favor for their friend. We're asking everybody to pay more attention to what's really going on in the bigger scheme of things. We're not trying to fight what the future is going to bring. We're trying to say, if we're going to get there, let's get there, and let's take our time and do the process correctly. Let's make sure we take into consideration the safety, the regulations, 2-man trucks. All that's a part of what we're trying to get to. We're not trying to say we'll never get there. We're saying do our jobs, us, you, everybody, do your job in trying to make this as safe as possible for these pedestrians, for these store owners, for these drivers, for my grandchildren, to know that we're going to be okay out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beck. I do have, Mr. Beck, I do have a follow-up question, and that is, you mentioned the safety driver, and we really want to hone in on this topic with regard to the safety driver and qualifications of that safety driver in the course of autonomous vehicle testing. So if we're going to have regulations to allow autonomous vehicles and have them be tested with a safety driver, do you have any thoughts as to what type of qualifications that safety driver should have, as well as any thoughts with regard to any data that would be reported to the regulatory agencies in the course of testing? Crashes, disengagements, things of that nature.
I'm not qualified to speak on that. I'll speak on behalf of my members. My members, the average member that I have working for our local that drives for my liquor industry has 12 years. 12 years.
Okay.
So the gentleman was speaking about 11 years of testing and things like that. Well, I have guys that are at 12 years and they still have to take tests. And they still have to be, we have inward-facing cameras. We have cameras inside the truck to make sure that they're doing what's right, making sure that they're following the proper procedures and laws and regulations. And we're saying that we're going to take all that away and let this truck just go out there on its own. I can't speak on who should be qualified to make that decision. I can tell you, though, we have concrete drivers have 25 years. That's all what, as a Teamster principal officer, I listen to the members. And when a member tells me, I got 25 years of service, I've done this for 25 years, that won't work, I'm going to listen. And I'm going to ask questions. Why won't it work? Can you give me some information? I want to understand that. I don't simply say, well, that's just you. You're saying it's not safe. Let's go ahead and move on. So those are the type of things that we're just asking. Just listen. Please understand what the plight is here. It's not to stop anything. It's to make sure it's safe enough to be able to move forward. And if you can't do that, then you got to stop it. And you have to take the process into consideration. So
Thank you.
Good morning, once again, Nat Buse, Aurora. So there's a couple meaty topics here that would be very difficult to get through in 2 minutes, but I will do my best. So the first I think is to really be careful about clarifying what we mean by testing with a driver. So there's kind of two use cases we're talking about here. One is during development, and the other one is after development, if you prove that you closed your safety case, that you now want to remove the driver, the test driver from behind the steering wheel. In the first instance, so during testing and development, one of the things the industry has done, at least over the past 5 years in concert with federal agencies and others in a very open process, is developing standards around what are the proper qualifications for a test driver who's supervising an autonomous system that's under development. There are very rigorous steps in there. It's not just enough to have a CDL. FMCSA also imposes some other requirements on top of there, as you all are familiar with. So I think I would start there. If we're talking about a system under development, there's a set of categories and a set of things that are super important to think through. On the other side, once you've closed your safety case, at least in my opinion from a safety perspective, it could be more dangerous to put a human or a random trained person behind the steering wheel of a vehicle that's not intended to have interference from a human within the cab. Human beings are terrible monitors of technology. We see that all the time. And without other safeguards, you could have a situation where maybe they're zoned out for a while and then they think they need to take control and they grab the steering wheel or stab on the brakes or something like that because they've lost situational awareness of what's happening around them, kind of putting the truck in a position that it wasn't supposed to be in the first place had it just been able to do what it's supposed to do. On the data reporting side of things, because again, running out of time, as folks know, but just kind of in general terms for the audience, NHTSA has a very rigorous process right now where companies have to report everything that happens to an autonomous test vehicle and a deployed vehicle to them. So certainly crashes is one of those, but that reporting goes well beyond crashes. The problem there has just always been the context, because that's literally everything that happens. We had to report that a 2x4 fell off of another truck and hit us, for example. This has nothing to do with the safety of the vehicle, but it's really about other things that happen on the roadway. So I would start there and figure out how to have a process where it's not duplicative reporting to California and to the feds, and maybe there's something that can be worked out there between those agencies to kind of figure out a single way to not have basically duplicative reporting requirements of the same thing. And NHTSA has actually also announced that they're going to have another program where there'll be more data reporting in there.
Okay, thank you. I do have a follow-up question.
Sure, go ahead.
And then we'll go to Miguel, and if you guys have it. So you outlined two different scenarios of testing with the driver. And one scenario was testing heavy-duty vehicles while the technology is under development and having a safety driver in the cab.
Yeah.
And if I heard you right, you said that currently there are some regulations or some guidelines already in place, but the companies themselves are the ones that determine whether or not that driver is qualified to be in the cab.
Right.
Do you feel that is something that, if California were to move forward, if we should leverage that same scenario? In other words, leave it up to the different companies to determine if that safety driver in the scenario is qualified to be that test driver?
I mean, I think there is a role for the state, just like the state regulates drivers today and the processes that they have gone through, as mentioned by several of the speakers. There's no reason to disrupt that. I'm just pointing out that what's there today is insufficient for supervising an autonomous system. And there's been a lot of real good work over the last 3 years to kind of develop that corpus of research to say, here's what's needed. For example, one of the things is more frequent breaks, right? I will hear all the time from our test drivers today that supervising that autonomous system is actually a lot harder than just driving a tractor, for example. And so we have a whole fatigue program around that where they are allowed to have, or not allowed, but take more breaks at will, right? We don't have a policy where, they're not allowed to, and we're more concerned about getting them point A to point B. It's really up to them. So it's a self-reporting program, but we monitor it on the safety side. It's just one small example of why it's different.
Okay. Thank you. Miguel, I think you had a question, and then Nick, you had a question.
So Ned, you mentioned your safety case, closing the safety case. What safety performance indicators, SPIs, would you suggest when you're talking about closing that safety case and say moving, let's say, to the next level of permitting? What can you share with us on that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So on the test and development side, one of the main components of that safety case is not necessarily the performance of the system itself, right? So the system goes through lots of different tests before it even gets on public roads. But then once it gets there, one of the things that we're trying to guard against is uncontrolled behavior. So the safety case, in that sense, the SPI that we're looking for is, are those control parameters violated? So in other words, if we have a test driver sitting there and for whatever reason the truck does something that it's not supposed to do, we have designed the system in such a way that that driver can always take control of the system before it reaches some situation where it's, say, breaching a lane or doing something, I think a gentleman mentioned screaming across 4 lanes of traffic. That cannot happen in the way our system is architected under a test and development situation, all right? Then on the other side, yes, as we get closer, and we've actually shared quite publicly our closure case for closing our driverless safety case. So right now we're in the last reported number was 46%. We're going to have a new number coming out here soon. In the context of that, we are developing currently what are those key safety performance indicators. But what we're using those for, and it's really important to understand this, is whether there are claims in our safety case that are broken. So it's not necessarily just about some performance aspect of the system. Of course, that's part of it. But there are other pieces that we care a lot about. So, for example, if we have an expectation for how many times we might have a minimum risk maneuver because something happened, right? We want to be able to have a safety performance indicator that's measuring that over time to figure out if that got violated somewhere in the process. Same thing around surprise scenarios. So there's a certain amount of scenarios that we understand are in the ODD. We will monitor that. If for some reason that gets off track, then we know we need to go back and investigate something. Those are just two real examples, but it's beyond, the casual conversation of 10 times safer than a human and all this other stuff that comes up. It actually has nothing to do with that because we're actually designing an engineered system, so we need engineering SPIs around that system to know that it's actually safe and doing what it's supposed to do.
Thank you. Nick?
Hey, sir, is there a standardized methodology for safety cases, like an SAE standard?
There is. There's a couple out there. So we leveraged what was being done in the UK for things like the nuclear industry, where they are sort of kind of, I would say, one of the premier experts on this, but there are other industries actually that also use safety cases. Medical devices is another one. And what the Underwriters Laboratory has developed a standard for safety cases. And it outlines sort of how you build a safety case, what are the claims you should think about, and even goes through some examples of things you might want to consider as you look at specific claims. And that standard has been, is now on its third rev.
Is there anything proprietary in that safety case?
Not in that standard, but certainly as you build your safety case, the evidence, because we're talking thousands of pieces of evidence to close a particular driverless safety case, there could be, yes, in that situation, certain business proprietary secrets, kind of how we solved autonomy, for example, is one of those. But there are other aspects that are in the public space where, you know, I mentioned the standards for how we think about test drivers. So in our VO safety case, that evidence would be what is already actually in the public domain that we've already put.
And that's easily accessible?
It's easily accessible, at least for our case. And I think, you know, if there is a process by which, you know, this rulemaking process would want to have those exposed in some different way, I think that would be certainly something worth considering.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Yep, thank you.
I'm Mike DeBaney, Sergeant at Arms, Teamsters Local 70. I'm comforted to hear that there are currently drivers in these trucks testing them out. I don't see why that can't continue. I mean, risk assessment never ends. Hazards never end. And apparently there's already a mechanism for this to happen, so I don't think it's out of the question. As far as who should be in these trucks if they were to be in there ongoing, I would put to you that you are the DMV. You are the sole grantor of a license to drive a truck. Driving is a privilege and not a right. I don't think you have to go anywhere outside of your own standards to determine who should be in that truck. I'm befuddled that you're asking the people selling the technology who they think should be in there to do that job. I mean, you guys are the ultimate authority on the subject, and I think you guys would do a decent job of figuring that out. Oh, shoot, I had another point. I did. Quite some time. Again, I think there's every reason to keep people in these trucks. Maybe not forever, but for the time being. I mean, talking about that a truck can't cross 4 lanes, bet me. That it can't happen with their trucks, bet me. I've seen it happen with vehicles that it shouldn't happen with. I don't believe that we can't work together. I don't believe that. I refuse to believe it because we're going to have to. The two extremes are going to come together. But I think it needs to be done safely, and I think it's important that, from my perspective, that no driver that isn't less qualified, the driver should be qualified in everything that a truck may carry. That driver not only should be a Class A license, he should be hazmat, he should be tankers, he should be doubles and triples, whatever may be in that truck. That driver should be able to respond. And to the comment that people are a bad judge of technology, well, those same people are coding that technology. So are we good or are we bad? But thank you for your time.
Mr. Baines, I do have a follow-up question. Yeah, no problem. It's a question and comment, actually.
Yes, sir.
So thank you very much for your comments. The reason you're right, the DMV can make that determination in terms of the qualifications, but we want this to be an open process and a collaborative process. And so that's why we're asking you and everybody else about what your thoughts are on this. And just so to level set, to make sure everybody's aware of the structure that we already have in place, because your comment about having test drivers in these vehicles is telling. We currently have a structure in place for companies to develop autonomous technologies, and that requires a test driver to be in these vehicles. So the test driver has to be in the vehicles, and then the next step is to remove the test driver from the vehicle, which is a big step. And then there's another step, and this is all within testing. And then there's another step before deployment. As was said before, that's a long, drawn-out process that needs to go through. So that being said, appreciate your comments with regard to being able to determine the qualifications of the safety driver. And if you have any further comments about, as you sit and others are speaking, if you have any other thoughts about what type of qualifications other than, say, having a CDL or having specific endorsements to drive hazmat and so forth, maybe length of time with your CDL or something like that. We really would appreciate that input, because that'll help inform us what you all think would be the appropriate safety driver as we move on with these regulations. So appreciate it.
And I will add, since I'm standing here again, that I appreciate the fact that you're opening it up to suggestions, but I think the judgment of the DMV will probably be best. But I would say take the highest qualification estimate you receive from me, this gentleman here, or anybody in this building, and make it even stricter. We can't be too safe. We can't be too careful. People's lives depend on this, and I know as DMV you certainly understand that, because you guys have done your best to drum safety into my head for 29 years, and thank you for doing so. That's why I have a clean record. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
I have one more question.
Oh, right.
One more, sir.
We've got one more from the CHP.
One more for you. You're popular.
Gentlemen, I'm fat and I am tired. I don't stand well for long periods of time. Please, go ahead.
We just like watching you walk back and forth.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the question, you somewhat brought it up, but the question is, what will be safe enough, or how do you move from testing with a safety driver to testing without a safety driver? And I think you mentioned something about the qualifications of the other drivers and thinking about the safest drivers. Because as we know, there are really good drivers, and there are some that probably shouldn't be driving. There's some that are, and it's like anything in life. There's usually a bell curve, and most of us land in the middle of it, and some of us are exceptional, and some of us are on the other side of that curve. So the question is, where should that fall, or how's that metric? Is there a way that you think of that can take the qualifications of a driver to where you would say, okay, I think that's at its point where I would accept a driver out situation, or it needs to remain driver in. Where's the goal line, or where's the goal post, or does that have to keep moving, or will that move, or should it not move?
But the goal line should keep moving. As with the technology is only going to increase and expand and have more capability. It's the nature of technology. But to your point, the first question, what about the transition from driver in cab training to not driver in cab training? I don't like that idea. I don't have any solutions for you in that regard. I really don't like that idea, personally. Will there come a day when that may be reasonable? Sure, maybe. Maybe a long time off. Who knows? But I think it's inappropriate for me to take a guess at what that might be. I'll do a follow-up on the qualifications. And you're asking me personally what I would personally think. I would think a driver who has a clean record, is shown, at least by their record, an interest in safety, not being reckless, and I mean in commercial vehicle and in personal vehicle. I think that's important. I think they should be, again, well steeped in what trucking is. I think probably a brand new truck driver would be book smart, but not so much practical on the road. So I think a tenure, should apply. And as far as endorsements, they should have every single endorsement, whether or not they're ever going to use it outside of training. I think it's important, because you should be testing every single thing that could happen in the trailer of that truck or in the cab of that truck on the road. And it's just paramount to me. It really is. That every single thing should be accounted for. And not knowing all the dangers, we can only account for so much. But there'll be plenty of things. Wasn't it a couple of years ago, we were being warned by trusted agencies, DMV and others, I think it was DMV, that we have to worry about bad actors hacking planes and trains and so forth. Oh, do those bad actors no longer exist? Because I'd love to be on my computer and take control of a truck and make it like a video game. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm not a worrywart, but I'm saying is we can't think we know all the risks. There's so much we don't know. That we know. But I would love to sit down. What do we think?
We good?
Any other questions?
I won't call you back.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Aiden Ali Sullivan, representing Waymo. I will watch my time. Let's see, regarding the first point in 2A, testing with a safety driver. Waymo suggests providing distinct requirements for remote operators who perform remote driving versus those who exclusively provide remote assistance. The latest versions of SAEJ 3016 describes a fundamental difference between these, so from a definitional standpoint, we think that's an important distinction. We anticipate that any future HD operations in California would likely closely mirror our rollout of light-duty vehicles in the state and our previous heavy-duty operations in other states, namely that they would begin under a testing regime with a test operator, then move to the in-vehicle operator when benchmarks have been met, and then finally begin driverless commercial operations. We do not contemplate an operational rollout that does not include some level of testing with a human operator who holds a CDL in the vehicle. And further, we currently engage in these types of closed course testing here in California and are actively and incrementally testing in other states. Regarding data reporting during testing, we support the department's suggestion of moving to provide copies of NHTSA crash reports in lieu of parallel and duplicative reporting specific to California. Let's see, regarding thresholds or metrics that should be required before testing without a driver, we do not believe that a time limit can or should dictate when it's appropriate to begin testing without a driver. Rather, we believe that the department should continue to use performance and review-based metrics on each individual company's application to make that determination of when it's safe to remove a driver. And then finally, regarding compensation during testing, Waymo suggests that the department revise the regulations to clarify that testing with commercial AVs may include conducting limited business-to-business pilots where the manufacturer receives monetary compensation for carrying that property. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a follow-up question. So, Mr. Ali Sullivan, you, if I heard you right, you said, or Waymo feels we should keep the same structure with regard to a test driver in heavy duty as we already have in light duty vehicles. And so that test driver qualifications are not at fault in any crash, no DUI, and 3 years, no DUI in the past 10 years, no at fault in the past 3 years, no more than 1 point on their license in the past 3 years. Waymo feels that same criteria shifted to a CDL would be adequate?
I can't definitively say how the department should make that determination. However, our expectation is that should this move forward, it would be very similar to that light duty experience with restrictions that the department deems necessary. So to put it simply, I don't anticipate that there would be significant opposition from us should that be the path that the department wants to move forward with.
Okay, thank you. Miguel?
Question, you mentioned the remote assistant distinction. Thoughts about the remote assistants having CDLs, actually being commercial drivers themselves?
I would not be able to give you a determination at this time on that, but happy to further respond to that at a later point, Miguel.
Okay. And just so the audience is aware of what Miguel's follow-up question again is, we're talking about the test driver in the vehicle. Miguel's question was on anybody that's remotely monitoring the vehicle in the course of testing. Should that person that's monitoring the vehicle also be properly licensed with a CDL? That's the open question that we're also asking. So thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, you can't sit down yet.
Sure.
Oh, and Nick's got one too, just to line him up. So you did mention that performance and review-based metrics should be used when considering moving from a driver in to driver out type scenario.
Yep.
What are those metrics in your mind? What should we use? What should be used to determine that?
There's a variety of determinations that the department can choose. I would anticipate that it would look very similar to the light duty metrics that you currently have. I can't speak to what you should or shouldn't make as a determination, but I think there's a variety of things that you could look at based on sort of the metrics of what the company has done and the body of work that they've provided to you to make that determination.
And should those metrics be the same for every company?
Again, that determination will be up to the department. I think each company will likely approach this process differently. However, having some level of standardized expectations at the department level would likely make sense.
Thank you. Nick?
Hey, sorry, I heard you mention other jurisdictions.
Correct.
Was that in reference to the testing that's occurring in other jurisdictions? And
That was in reference to operations that we have outside of California.
should the department or the departments consider testing results from other jurisdictions?
Again, up to the department how they determine to move forward. I think that the experience and the work that companies have done that is applicable to what operations in California would look like, i.e. like for like, should be taken into account as companies look to move forward here in California. So short answer, yes, I think that the experience in other states should be part of the body of knowledge that the department looks at.
And in much the way that CIDLIS or the Commercial Driver's License Information System works, would negative experiences also be, I would assume, be considered as well as the positive ones?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Oh, we got one more.
Yes, please.
Question. You mentioned revising compensation during testing.
Yep.
And you mentioned limited business pilots. What's the distinction between that, or maybe you can clarify that and distinguish that from deployment, full commercial deployment?
Yeah, and that was not necessarily a defined term that I was stating. I think the point being that during the testing process, which theoretically would be more limited in nature than a deployment operation, during that testing process, that compensation should be allowed.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Drew Cooper, and I'm with the San Francisco County Transportation Authority.
So could you speak closer to the microphone?
Sure, sorry. My name is Drew Cooper, and I'm with the San Francisco County Transportation Authority. We're the congestion management agency for San Francisco, and we'd like to thank the DMV for holding this hearing today. We appreciate, in particular, the DMV's willingness to revisit components of the AV light-duty permitting process. In particular with a focus on performance evaluation, safety and operational evaluation, incremental performance-based permit expansion, and certification of road readiness. San Francisco has valuable expertise and on-the-ground experience to assist the DMV in refining its regulations, and we offer our partnership. We have on-the-ground experience with testing and deployment of AVs on our city streets. We have worked for years with TNC and AV data reporting requirements and have done leading research on the impacts of TNCs on transportation in San Francisco. The DMV does not need to start from scratch with data reporting requirements. The CPUC's recent AV data reporting staff proposal and workshop provides a strong foundation, and we encourage the DMV to coordinate with the CPUC and NHTSA and others to harmonize reporting requirements to reduce reporting burden for the companies and to make data consistent and easier to use by analysts and by the public. The purpose of collecting all of this data is for performance evaluation. That performance evaluation then should inform permitting decisions and provide the public with valuable information about the impacts of this technology on the public transportation system and safety. To support this, data should be reported at every phase of deployment, from testing with a safety driver all the way through full driverless deployment, and should not end when a company receives a deployment permit. This is important because based on human driving, some severe events like fatalities and injuries may not occur until hundreds of millions of miles have been driven. Finally, we propose that, like humans, automated driving systems should need to pass basic driver's tests to ensure that they are competent to operate on public roads. Again, we thank you for this opportunity and look
Thank
forward
you,
to
Mr. Cooper.
collaborating.
Any questions? Yeah, thank you.
Good morning. My
morning.
name is Joseph Celia. I'm the principal officer of Teamsters Local 2785 in San Francisco. I've been with the local for 36 years, and I represent United Parcel Service Workers in San Francisco and San Mateo County. Also represent the DHL drivers. So it's a large delivery company within San Francisco, and I would implore the committee before me to consult with our lobbyist in Sacramento in regards to AB, to propose to make sure that everything is done correctly, and more specifically towards safety of these vehicles. It's very important, and thank you for your time. One more thing, since I have a minute and 20 seconds left. I heard from the previous, I think, the individual representing Waymo bring something up, and it may have been a question from the committee in regards to a CDL for the individual in the vehicle while these tests are going on, and it really behooves me to why wouldn't there be somebody with a CDL in a vehicle when it's out in the street in the public, somebody who is trained, who has passed a test to perform those duties, very important duties. It behooves me that somebody would not have a CDL, that would even be out there. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Just to clarify, the question wasn't necessarily whether it's a CDL, if the test driver is a CDL license holder, but it's what else besides just having a CDL, and looking at number of years of experience and any endorsements and things of that nature.
So they do require a CDL.
We haven't developed any regulations yet, and so we're trying to understand
Understood.
what we should consider as if we move forward in developing these regulations.
Thank you for the explanation.
Yeah, thank you.
Right. I think as it stands right now, under California law, if you're operating a commercial motor vehicle requiring a class of license or an endorsement, you must have that class of license or endorsement. Does that make sense?
That totally makes sense.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Steve Kenner. I'm the Vice President of Safety at Kodiak. I wanted to just supplement some of the comments that Mr. Buse made about the safety case and your question about standards. At Kodiak, we also follow a safety case approach. It's a comprehensive methodology to address, the safety of, these kinds of, important systems and make sure that you can, make the case that you're safe to operate on public roads in whatever vehicle and use case that you're doing. The standard he referenced was the United Laboratories 4600. And at this point, it's a voluntary standard, but I think it is a body of work that's excellent, and I think a lot of the autonomous companies are using as a reference to be able to say, what is all the comprehensive categories of safety. But it's for driverless vehicles. It doesn't include the sections that you were asking about relative to a safety driver and their qualifications. However, I'd like to point you to two other standards. One is an SAE standard, J3018. That standard is guidelines for the safe on-road testing of autonomous vehicles that are level 3, 4, and 5, and I think that's a very helpful reference. The second one is an automated vehicle safety consortium best practice, and that one was for the in-vehicle fallback test driver. So I think both of those vehicles have elements that are worth evaluating as you're considering the regulation. It's bodies of work that had, a group of people that all came to an agreement on, what's important, there, and I think it's worth reviewing as you're going through this process.
Thank you, Mr. Kenner. Any questions? No? Okay, thank you.
Nat Buse from Aurora. Just wanted to clarify two things in the questions that were back and forth there. So one, I mentioned in the opening around just mirroring what we did for light, I say we because I was at the FedSim, but like what was done for light vehicle versus heavy. This idea of a driverless test on public roads is actually a little bit confusing, right? Unlike the rideshare piece where there's like whitelisting and all this other thing that people are trying to do to prove a business model, that is fundamentally different than what we're doing on commercial trucking, where it a tool, a business-to-business tool, right? And so I think as y'all are thinking about that, that's why I kind of draw a very stark difference between it's either has a driver in the vehicle who's responsible for some tasks versus not. Because I think it's a little bit confusing even to me as a safety person, but I'm sure to a lot of people in the audience, like, why would you ever quote-unquote test with nobody in the vehicle? You're either doing it or you're not, and it goes specifically to having a safety case that's closed for its specific purpose, if that makes sense. You can ask me a follow-up question. And I think on the second point, this idea of remote assistance versus remote operations. And so J3016 is super clear on the difference between those two things. And just for purposes of clarity, it's not clear in my mind that you would impose very graduated or kind of the most severe training requirements, certifications, et cetera, on an individual who literally is supposed to be, in one case, if they're just overseeing or supervising, versus trying to manipulate the vehicle. And I think forcing companies to be super crisp about what they're doing in those use cases, I think is tying it back to the standard, is the way that then you all can think through what are the proper qualifications for said individual, right? So again, if the person who is remote, overseeing is literally not having any control over the safety aspects of the vehicle, I think that's a fundamentally different use case than someone who's joystick driving or whatever the case technology they might be using to do that. And to be clear, Aurora's not doing that latter case.
Okay. I do have a follow-up question, Mr. Buse. Then you, just so I understand, what you're saying is that remote operation is different than remote assistance.
Yes.
So someone outside of the vehicle overseeing the testing of a heavy-duty vehicle has two different functions: overseeing versus having the capability to operate the vehicle. If you have the capability to operate the vehicle, you feel that that person should be properly licensed with the CDL and other requirements that would be commensurate with operating the vehicle. If that person is overseeing the vehicle, perhaps those requirements do not need to be in place.
Right, they're just different, right? If someone is driving the vehicle remotely, and I understand there are technology companies that are working on that, to me that is a separate level of safety and responsibility and requirements than if that individual is more like a dispatcher and just overseeing the vehicle and is available if the vehicle is, is stuck in some situation, some rare situation, or whatever the case may be. The fundamental aspects of safety, if they rely on the vehicle, that's different, right? Like the vehicle has to be responsible for everything in that particular use case. If someone is saying, well, no, I'm going to allow the remote person to, remote drive the vehicle in a certain situation, I think that is fundamentally different and requires a different level of effort and a different level of safety.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Nick?
Just one more clarifying question. Yeah. Would it ever be a case where a remote assistant would make a vehicle move versus a remote operator?
And no, I think in one case, right, like in the remote case where we'll call it joystick driving because I think everybody can have a very visceral reaction to that, right? They're driving through a screen or however they're doing their technology, that's different. If someone is saying, I'm going to suggest to the vehicle to go to this different spot, but then the vehicle is the one responsible for making all the decisions, that's different. Because again, the vehicle is still fundamentally responsible for all the safety aspects on board, right? Suppose the connection drops out. You can't have the truck all of a sudden be in a state that it's not supposed to be in if that is your primary use case, is the safety aspect of the truck itself. And so yes, in my mind, from a safety aspect, and again, J3016 is very clear about that, remote driving is a fundamentally different use case than kind of oversight and making suggestions, much like a dispatch person does today, right? They'll call a truck driver and say, hey, there's weather up ahead, or whatever the case may be. The dispatcher doesn't have to have a CDL in that use case, right? They're a fundamentally different part of the business versus, and again, I know some technology companies are working on this, and I know the terms have been a bit confusing, where they are literally driving the truck remotely. And I think those are different.
I think, Miguel, did you have a question?
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Good morning. Jordan
morning.
Coleman, Kodiak Robotics. First, thank you very much to the DMV and CHP for convening this opportunity for discussion amongst interested parties. I'd also like to thank the truck drivers in the room for taking time out of their days, taking time away from work to discuss this critical safety technology. We're only going to be able to solve this problem together by pulling together the points of view and interest of all relevant stakeholders. I wanted to come up to kind of double click on a comment made by Mr. Buse regarding the difference between testing and deployment in autonomous trucking. We share the viewpoint that there is no such thing as on-road driver-out testing of these vehicles. The work that needs to be done in order to prove the safety cases mentioned can be completed with driver-in safety drivers actively monitoring the systems as they're done today, work in simulation, heavy work in simulation, to be able to handle some of those edge cases and other potentially dangerous scenarios and not do so on road, as well as work done on closed course test tracks, including driverless testing on closed course test tracks where you can control the variables as well as other actors in and around the scene. With that background, to a comment made earlier, we fundamentally believe that compensation during the testing phase is critical. I think we can safely say to everyone in this room that we believe that carriers and shippers should pay their fair share for work that's being done. I think that is a common interest for everyone in this room. And we need to move goods. We need to test with various types of load, reefer loads, drive-in, various kinds of things in the back of the truck, different weights on axles, et cetera. And the best way to do that is to do that carrying actual freight. Otherwise, in addition, you would require essentially two vehicles to make the same trip. We could do one with an empty trailer loaded with sand or some other placeholder. Another truck is simply going to have to drive, therefore only increasing vehicle miles traveled, increasing the impacts from a fuel emissions and other perspectives that I think we as Californians care deeply about. And lastly, noting that my time is coming to an end, on a personal level, I also want to make the statement, there have been a lot of discussions in this room about wanting to make sure that we protect our children, our grandchildren, et cetera. I'm a father of 3 young children who were born and raised in the state of California, who are on the roads in San Francisco and on the highways in and around the Bay Area on a daily basis. I care deeply about safety. My colleagues within this industry care deeply about safety. We are mission-driven people who want to help put this technology on roads to help save lives and make a safer and better world for my children and everyone's children. And I just thought it was very important to make that statement.
Thank you. I do have a follow-up question, and it's on the compensation piece. So you mentioned that it is critically important to have a compensation regime within testing, both, if I understood you right, both with testing with a safety driver and testing without a safety driver. In both of those scenarios, companies should be able to be compensated for in the course of testing. If that is the case, how would you segment and delineate testing versus deployment?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think from our perspective, there is no such thing as driver-out testing. It is incumbent on us to prove to you all, our regulators on the federal level, law enforcement countrywide, state DOTs, state DMVs countrywide, and prove that it's safe enough before we ever remove the driver. Once we've done so, we're no longer testing. We are in deployment and we are in commercial deployment. However, there is that requirement to test with various load types while a driver remains in the cab, and I don't think it serves the public interest, any of our regulators' interests, drivers' interests, or otherwise, for us to not be able to charge a fair rate to shippers and carriers for the goods that we move.
I'm still trying to understand, how would you say a company is testing versus a company has deployed the technology if right now all we have for a measure to delineate both of those is being compensated?
So again, I think from Kodiak's perspective, we believe that it is the driver in versus the driver out is the separation between testing and deployment. That it doesn't have anything to do with the compensation itself. It has to do with whether you have the safety driver in the cab or if you've removed the safety driver. We believe safety driver in the cab is testing. We believe the safety driver having been removed from the cab is deployment.
Okay. Any other questions?
And maybe we're thinking like I'm not following that either. So. You said there's no such thing as driver out testing. So are you talking about on highway?
Correct.
You
There
would
is,
never have a scenario where there would be a driver out in a testing permit situation.
we of course will do what's required under any relevant regulations. However, from our perspective, that driver out, we need to have proven the safety of our vehicles before ever removing that driver. There will of course continue to be work done after the driver is removed to continue to push the technology forward, continue to mature it. That said, from a hauling loads perspective, we will not be hauling any loads with a driver out until we've proven the safety case to you all, until we're deployed. So we don't believe that that is the barrier. Today, we've driven, we deliver 50 plus loads a week, have delivered almost 4,000 loads with safety drivers in cabs across the southern half of the United States. And we view that as fundamentally important, not only for working with our customers to better understand how to integrate this technology into their fleets, but also to continue to do the important R&D work to prove the safety case of what we're trying to accomplish.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Ariel Wolf with California Alliance for Freight Innovation. I'll take just 1 minute.
You have 2 minutes.
Half the, or, okay. Just to follow up on that, I'll just really underscore the point that AV trucking is fundamentally commercial in nature. And so the issue of compensation, I know we just had you had a good exchange with Jordan on that. I just want to underscore that on behalf of the industry, that compensation is a very tricky metric or delineation between testing and deployment. And I think everything that was said before makes good sense. And there, you know, in the agenda, there are other ideas, thresholds, metrics, and other data reporting structures that I think would point to that. And limiting compensation in this context really would interfere with business relationships and the entire idea of what we're trying to accomplish here. But I want to turn to one other note that came up a few discussions ago, and that's with respect to the distinction between remote assistance and remote operation. And just make one point, and that is this proceeding does not exist in a vacuum. There is a parallel proceeding at the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, an expected proposed rule to be forthcoming that looks at that question in particular, but other issues and questions that touch on some of these issues. It's really a note and a point that we should be mindful of that and kind of those distinctions and where those boundaries are, and where the federal government does have jurisdiction to look at those questions and maybe even provide some helpful guidance and answers there as we continue through this proceeding, and not to get into a place where there's divergence or anything like that, but we can try and leverage the work there and really rely on what's happening at the federal side. So.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Wolf, I'll ask you the same question that I asked the previous speaker with regard to compensation. Maybe I'll ask it a different way, because many of you had said utilize the same structure that we currently have for light-duty vehicles moving forward into heavy-duty vehicles as an option. In that structure, in the light-duty vehicle regime, we have testing with a driver, testing without a driver, and then we have deployment. And the difference between deployment and testing with a driver and testing without a driver is being able to charge a fare, is being able to be compensated by the companies. So what you mentioned was the ability to be compensated in the course of testing is critical. If that is the case, then how would we, and if we were to move forward with the light-duty structure, how would you define this operations piece?
Yeah, well, I'll leave it to some of the folks from the specific companies to talk about that in detail. But what I'll say is this. When we talk about leveraging the light-duty structure, it's certainly not grafting the entire thing here.
Right.
There are going to be aspects of it. For example, we talked about the test driver qualifications and things like that I think there are good things to think about and bringing over. But it doesn't need to reflect the exact thing. I think, as Jordan was saying, testing and deployment mean things that are different in the trucking context. And whether there are thresholds or other kinds of metrics that happen in the testing phase with the driver that are examined prior to a permit for deployment, while commercialization and takes place in the testing phase, that's something that we should be exploring and thinking about. What are those parameters?
and again, leave it to some of the folks in that to speak in detail. But I think it's not a complete parallel, as you're pointing out, but there are opportunities to look at some of those thresholds.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Well, not for
Wolf,
not
we
for
got
you,
a
Mr.
question.
Wolf, but I think I heard earlier from one of the speakers about minimal changes or surgical changes. And I'm just curious, I don't want to, how do I say it? Would that be a minimal change or a surgical change to move from the model of compensation as a delineation line?
You're talking in the trucking context to move from compensation?
'Cause I previously heard a previous speaker, I believe it was Mr. Ali Sullivan, that talked about surgical changes or minimal changes.
Minimal changes from what? I'm not understanding the question.
And from the light duty regulations to the heavy duty regulations. They would only require light duty, or they would only require minimal surgical changes.
Well, you can come up and follow
Yes.
up, but I think that was in the context of driver qualification, driver testing qualifications, and I think in other aspects as well, as we'll talk about throughout the day. But on this issue of compensation, it touches on the fundamental nature of trucking, and there has to be a path to commercialize and have business relationships in the testing phase. Otherwise, you run into some of the problems. So that's, it's not going to be a perfect parallel, but as much as can be ported over because of the success of the program and how much thought and effort went into it in the light duty side, that should be brought over. But on commercialization, that's a part that really, we just want to emphasize needs to be, it can't be the delineation because of the inherent nature of AV trucking.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak and for this important process. Really appreciate it. Rich Steiner, Head of Policy at GADIC. I'm just going to build on some of the comments that have been made around testing, compensation under testing, but I'm going to preface my comments shrouded in safety, as they absolutely
Yeah, I
should
may have
be.
missed your name.
Rich Steiner, Head of Policy at GADIC.
Thank you very much.
So we move goods between distribution centers, warehouses, and storefronts to help the logistics industry keep pace with the demanding nature of today's consumer. We focus on known, repeatable, predictable routes specifically to maximize safety and operational efficiency, and today have safely delivered over 600,000 orders for customers across the country. Safety is at the core of everything that we do at GADIC. It's integrated into all facets of our business, from simulation to testing to deployment, spanning our technology, processes, culture, organization, and operations. Our autonomous trucks prioritize a defensive style of driving, meaning that they're acutely aware of the potential for unpredictable movements of other road users, including vehicles, pedestrians, cyclists. And we have the luxury of choosing specific routes on which we operate, meaning we avoid schools, hospitals, heavily pedestrianized areas, fire stations, and so on. Now, to the point at hand, over the past few years, the customers that we serve across the country, including Walmart, Kroger, Pitney Bowes, Georgia Pacific, and more, have had to drastically adapt the way that they meet customer demand for goods, with increased frequency and availability at a greater number of locations. Simply put, this means that we've seen a need for even more trucks and trips, and suffice it to say, there is work to be done to meet this need. So, to the question at hand, we do not feel that restrictions on compensation for testing should be imposed, as they are not safety relevant. We hold ourselves to the same rigorous safety standards in the context of testing and deployment. From a commercial relationship perspective, and I think this builds on some of the comments that have already been made today, limiting compensation during testing would have challenging and even prohibitive impacts for our commercial relationships, and therefore ultimately the rollout of this technology in a safe and structured and regulated fashion. Finally, I'll just say, we're thrilled that in the light of this shifting logistics landscape that we've seen day in, day out, and I think that all Californians have certainly been feeling, we're thrilled to see that the DMV and CHP continue this thoughtful approach to the rulemaking, and happy to stand for any questions if there are any.
Thank you. And since you brought up compensation, I'll ask you the same question again.
Sure.
How would you define testing versus deployment if compensation is not that metric?
So I think building on some of the comments that have perhaps already been made, I mean, we would not consider ourselves to be testing at that driver out phase. Significant amounts of both simulation, private closed course track testing, and then testing with a safety driver on board would have taken place before the driver out operations would occur. Under that testing phase, we see no reason from a safety perspective why there should be any limitation on the compensation.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, Aiden Ellie Sullivan. Mr. Doko, I believe you had asked a question regarding those sort of surgical changes regarding compensation. And just to clarify, that was indeed what I was referring to. I think if you look at from an adjustment standpoint of, I believe it's 38,750, you can sort of surgically change language or add in language that would allow for compensation during testing for heavy-duty vehicles, a distinction between heavy-duty and light-duty, which you can't add compensation for under testing.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
Sam Lesh from Wabi Innovation. Thank you again for holding all of this and having the detailed kind of conversation that we are. To one specific point that I feel like is being beaten to the ground, but maybe could use a little bit of clarification about why compensation. I think, in our company's perspective, you're hearing kind of so much about as a key piece. Obviously there's the business to business side that Jordan was kind of illuminating on, but it kind of goes beyond that. It goes into the regulatory side as well, especially on the federal side, right? We are not just interacting with customers, and need to, test hauling their freight, which is a core way to measure the competency of my company's own systems, for instance. But there's a host of things that, in our view, compensation on the passenger side seems to be a little bit of a nice to have in some ways, right? You can do it, you cannot do it. That can be a little bit more flexible. But on the motor carrier side, you have to meet certain requirements right now that cost money in order to run as a trucking company, right? You need to meet $750,000 in minimum insurance. You need to often have commercial insurance for the cargo itself, and then you also need to keep in mind that you are hauling someone's trailer, for instance, that is not yours, right? You're hauling freight that is not yours. All those comes with a lot of extra burden and costs for a developer that you don't have in our view on the passenger side when you are just if you were moving a robotaxi, hauling a person or not hauling a person, that doesn't change the structure of the expenditures that you need to put out there. But on the trucking side, you're taking a ton of more burdens financially in order to run in trucking, and therefore the need to continue a business relationship and get some basic compensation is really key to being able to test and have those kind of commercial relationships. So just wanted to clarify that if helpful.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, we have some.
And this might be more for Mr. Steiner from a previous comment, but it relates back to what one of the drivers mentioned earlier about having the need of an extra driver when you're going to some neighborhoods that might be less safe than a normal route. Does the focus of since we're talking about testing and driver in, is the focus really on the vehicle's capabilities, which I think it would be, because ultimately I would assume the goal is to have driver out. But is there how does it all tie together with some of the comments that were made about needing a driver at the end, or a second driver, or maybe a second employee in the vehicle due to some of the areas? Because I would, at some point, that question has to be answered. How does it all work? And
Right.
I don't know if the answer is here today, but it seems like some of these things are converging right now at this moment
Yeah.
in the workshop.
I mean, at least from my perspective and my company's perspective, those are the key business decisions in some ways, right? That's what they will need to decide, even outside of what you all are discussing about whether it makes sense and where it makes sense for them to use the technology, right? I mean, if there are safety concerns of load securement and the safety of the load that they need to put, in going through certain parts of the state, that's on them whether they want to have a human attendant there, waiting to make sure that no one goes and, clips the tag or, otherwise kind of, engages in some sorts of weird behavior, right? For us, that's less of an autonomy system performance, and that's more of the business decision. But it's also important, in my mind at least, to keep in mind, there are federal requirements as well on just kind of, monitoring the load when it comes to hazmat or dangerous chemicals. That won't go away, right? So any sort of restrictions on that end will need to continue. But the rest of it, in our mind, is a business decision, right? So for the same reasons that a company would decide that they wanted 2 drivers in there in order to watch the rest of the freight that was in the trailer itself, that's on them to decide on that. That has nothing to do in our minds with the safety performance of the vehicle. That's because any more than it has to do with the safety performance of a human driver, it's really just you want to make sure that no one goes in and steals the load. But I'll let Rich illuminate if he wants to.
Sure, and I think sometimes, the discussion was earlier about humans and monitoring technology, and so maybe I'll just ask this question. In the safety cases that are being built, and I know they're by company, but is it considered that do safety cases consider that even though the ultimate goal would be to have a driver out, that at some point there may need to be not necessarily a driver, but someone who could be a driver or could be a passenger that has these operation or the purpose of security. But are those safety cases considering that there may be a rider of some type in that vehicle?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, I think the, at least from my company's perspective, that's less of a system performance kind of question again, right? So it's less of, when we're building our safety case as we are right now, that is focused on the safety and efficacy and performance of the actual system, right? Load securement, freight securement and all that, really comes down more to the business side of things in some ways. And so we kind of handle it a little bit separately, but that also gets down to the choice of, what kind of freight you're actually hauling, right? Who you're deciding to partner with and what the risks are there. So, we don't see it as much as the system performance, right? Just in the, to go back to the example from before, if you're driving a liquor truck and you decide that, as a company, you want 2 drivers in there, that has nothing to do with the safety of that driver to actually move the goods from point A to point B. It's the second decision about, you're concerned about someone going in and stealing stuff, that is, when you're parked, right? Or when someone is going in and loading and is in the customer facility and, otherwise leaving that load unattended. So, to us, it really gets down to the customer relationship and, whether that type of freight makes sense to haul autonomously or should be done another way.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We'll have one more speaker, and then we'll move on to the next topic, which would be inspection requirements, as well as interaction with law enforcement and emergency vehicles. But before we move on, also think about this question about compensation and the delineation, again, between testing and deployment, because we really want to understand the different parameters that we could utilize. For example, right now, in testing, there are several data requirements, data reporting back to us, crashes, disengagements, things of that nature. Once a vehicle or technology is deployed, those data reporting requirements are no longer there. So a question could be, should those data requirements, should some data requirements be in place in deployment of heavy-duty vehicles? For example, deployment of heavy-duty vehicles may still require a person in the cab to adjust the loads periodically, for example. Should there be some other data requirements? I'll leave that so you can ponder that while we have another speaker up at the podium. So, please.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Don Crabtree. I've been with UPS and Local 2785 for probably 34 years now, and I've been recognized as safe driver at UPS for over 25 years. So I've seen a lot of things going on here in San Francisco, which is where I'm based. You're talking about, just mentioned, however, requirements on reporting on accidents and things like this. A driver doesn't have to be considered bad just because they have accidents all over the place. They can have near misses, they can have poor driving habits, they can have poor judgment, and all those things may or may not be recorded on any sort of device or even with an observer remotely looking at things. I've heard today a lot of, I think, it might, it could, but these things aren't hard facts. They aren't things that may make the difference between life and death out there on the road. These types of, everything needs to be recorded on these devices, and after a while, after listening to the respected folks here, the question came to my mind is, what's the big problem here? We have a system that works, a system that over decades with you folks and everyone here have helped to create. It works. Is it a disaster? No. So why are we going through all this where we have remote vehicles, assistant drivers, remote operators, test cases, and while I'm on the road, I see these people. There's a Waymo barn on my route. They get in the way of the sidewalk. They stop erratically. They drive poorly. And this is with 4 trainers, supposedly, on board. What's it going to do out there? And I heard that you folks might lift the technology from the light vehicles on up to the heavy vehicles. They need a lot of work. In passing, on a light note, there's a Star Trek episode about a computer, an ultimate computer that can take over the Enterprise. Well, they install it, and they get rid of the crew, and the only one left is the captain, now called Captain Dunzel. Well, I don't know if you've seen the episode, but things are not quite what they could have been. The computer has a virus in it or some sort of flaw. The whole thing goes to heck in a handbasket, and, thank heaven everything was okay. But the same thing can happen with any technology, any at all. The slightest flaw, hidden or otherwise, can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you. This is Julia Friedlander. I'm Julia Friedlander from the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency. And I want to say a few things that I plan to say, and then also want to respond to some of the dialogue that you've been having with the industry here. First of all,
Ms. Friedlander, I'm sorry, my 60-year-old ears are having trouble.
Can you hear
Would
me
you
here?
mind being closer to the mic? Thank you.
Not at all. The SFMTA acts as essentially a steward of the San Francisco streets, and our primary purpose is to ensure that every traveler can get where they're going safely, whatever mode they're using. And as we have seen demonstrated over the last year, our streets are extremely complex, they are extremely dynamic, they pose tremendous challenges to automated driving. We are very hopeful that the industry will be able to demonstrate its capacity to operate safely on streets as dynamic and complex as our streets. But we do think that there are important ways in which not only should you not simply pick up the existing regulations and apply them to trucking, but you also need to improve the existing regulations. And one of the reasons we say that is because we have been watching automated vehicles testing on our streets for more than 5 years. And yet it was only in the last year, when safety drivers were removed, that we were able to actually observe the capacity of the automated driving systems themselves without humans behind the wheel or even in the vehicle. And we think that among many other things, there's a key aspect of the existing regulations that needs to be improved, and that is around transparency. We do not expect perfection from the industry. It is absolutely correct that even the best professional drivers have crashes, and we are not expecting a universe in which there are no crashes or no failures of any kind. However, at the moment, it is not possible for us we have no reliable data about the extent of the problems that are occurring on our streets. And it is clear that there are problems occurring on our streets. If your standard of success, and speaking to the industry here, it's really important that we be co-creating the standards for success. And I think what's come out in this conversation is that if there are standards, we don't know what they are. There is no transparency about what is a level of performance that is adequate. If the standards believe that it is success for a vehicle to fail in our streets in a way that makes it impossible for our fire apparatus to respond to emergency calls, we believe that standard is too low. We believe if there is a performance standard, and that standard says that it is acceptable for vehicles to fail in ways that require transit passengers to get out of vehicles and stand on the street wondering when their next ride will come, we believe that standard is too low. Most importantly, we need transparency around that. And if
Ms. Friedlander, your 2 minutes are up.
I will make one last remark then. With respect to those failures that we know will happen, whether they be crashes or otherwise, if they are failures of vehicles simply getting stuck on our roads, and if the industry believes that, for example, there is an internal metric that says it would be great to get that vehicle cleared within 10 minutes, we ask you and the industry to work with us to understand when and where 10 minutes is absolutely not an acceptable metric for success. 10 minutes can mean the difference between life and death for somebody who is waiting for first responders. It can mean the difference between getting safely home or not getting safely home for people who are asked to get out of transit vehicles and stand on the sidewalk and wonder. So we really are eager to work closely with the industry and with the agency, but one of the things that I've heard here is the concept that there should be no such thing as driver out testing. And I think that's really worth thinking about. What is the threshold at which you have moved from testing to deployment? And if it is not, and what we have seen, I believe, on our San Francisco streets, whatever you call it, has been driver out testing. And while we have seen much very safe and good driving, we have also seen serious problems that need to be addressed before those standards are replicated for heavy-duty vehicles.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, so again, my name is Megan. I'm with Smart 1741 for the school bus drivers. I actually have to return back because I promised my dispatch that I would pick up my kids from their, my students from their summer program. So I just wanted to try and come up here and answer a couple of the questions I think that you had raised. I did want to support the brother that had spoken up here about the requirements about having there be CDL drivers as part of the testing. And I agree with him that there should be a degree of tenure because I know that me as a first-year driver was not my strongest time, that it should have some of that time behind there. And additionally, that like for thinking about technology, because you know my employer is technically is a technology company. They were previously a TNC. We were the first commercial drivers that they took on as employees. And we still have been part of, I mean, you know, I'm talking about navigation, but it's still like a testing thing, that you have people who are experienced and who know what, like, you can't go down these streets. This is not a safe area. Here's where we need to move things to. That you have people who are experienced and who are knowledgeable, who are part of the testing. And so that is absolute, so I think that's absolutely imperative to having that be part of the requirements, is that you have people who, you know, because like I can talk to friends who have a, you know, a regular driver's license, and, you know, if we're talking about the Smith system, you know, we start talking about those, like how far you look ahead to look for dangers, and it's not in their mindset. It's not something that they've learned. And so I think it's imperative to have that sort of thing. The other thing I wanted to just say quickly is I do think that it's really important to have there be a standard that is set by the state. That's not like, if you're talking about pulling drivers out of there, which personally I think there should always be a driver behind there no matter what it is, because, you know, that someone who's qualified, because they're, you know, just for as an example, I've gone up to Sacramento twice this week for dealing with another state bill that is going to require TNCs that contract with school districts to have a minimum requirement of training and like background and all of this stuff, so that there's a minimum standard. And I think that, you know, for talking about transparency, we should have there be a standard. We're talking about large vehicles. We're talking about ones that could be moving like hazardous materials. This is a public safety thing. I think we should have a standard. It should be transparent, and it should continue that there are, you know, if we're talking about there being, you know, that the metrics continue in the reporting after, you know, in the case that there are drivers taken out, I think it should continue, because that's how we continue to monitor and make sure that anything is being safe. We continue to have pull notices. Anything that happens on our driver's record, you guys all receive it. It goes to our employers. It's ongoing. And so I just wanted to ask for all of those things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Any other comments? Again, we'd like to hear your thoughts, again, about inspection requirements, interaction with law enforcement and emergency vehicles, and then also this concept about deployment versus testing as well. We're open to hear your thoughts, ideas, so that could, you know, inform us on what we should consider. So please.
Pardon me, Mr. Soriano, can you clarify which item on the agenda we're currently covering?
We're technically on inspection requirements, and then we've merged into interaction with law enforcement. So if you have comments on either of those, please
sure.
Go
yep.
ahead.
If I can speak to item number 3, inspection requirements. Again, Aiden Ali Sullivan, representing Waymo. Regarding inspection requirements, as noted in the agenda, we believe that commercial AVs should be subject to the same maintenance and operating condition requirements as a human-driven commercial motor vehicle. Application materials for permits could also require that the manufacturer explain any processes for ensuring that the ADS itself is in good working order, for example. And then further, when no human driver is present, whether in testing or in deployment, Waymo does support utilizing CVSA's newly approved enhanced pre-trip inspection procedure.
Okay. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you all very much. My name is Jeff Fair. I have the privilege to serve as the Executive Director of the Autonomous Vehicle Industry Association. We represent the world's leading Level 4 autonomous developers and manufacturers, including on the trucking space, and wanted to speak specifically to this issue of inspection requirements. And the AV industry has worked very closely with state law enforcement agencies, including with the California Highway Patrol, as well as our federal regulators, to develop a new voluntary inspection program that will streamline interactions between autonomous trucks and law enforcement at inspection sites. As many of you know, this program is currently being piloted by operators in Texas, and we expect it to continue to evolve as it is implemented and feedback is provided to CVSA. For this reason, we would not recommend codifying any particular standard due to the anticipated evolution of the program over time. That said, and I know this is reflected in the agenda, the AV industry is committed to complying with the CVSA inspection program, as well as with FMCSA and California-specific requirements, including the 90-day inspection requirement under California law, again, alluded to in the agenda. I know that there are particular industry participants that have been very actively involved in this process that can speak to some of that, as well as the anticipated evolution, but wanted to make sure that we were clear about our industry's commitment to this process.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Farrer, just, and I guess also for Mr. Ali Sullivan, just some questions on that. You mentioned not codifying the requirements. Does that mean you feel that if we move forward with regulations, the regulations should not speak to the CVSA or any other requirements and just leave it up to industry to self-certify, if you will, that they meet those requirements?
So to be responsive, I think the issue is that at this time that these are going to evolve, and I think there are learnings that are going to occur, and so we would not want to see premature codification of this, and it's something that we'd be happy to continue to dialogue with all of you as you engage in workshops and other types of action.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, one question, one more. You mentioned, sir, you mentioned anticipated evolution of the enhanced inspection, I believe. Can you delineate or I'm sorry, can you be a little bit more descriptive?
Sure. I think that some of the individual developers and manufacturers might be better suited to talk about their engagement during this process, but we do understand that this is an evolutionary kind of process that's going on, and so want to make sure that we're taking into account those things going forward, but I would probably defer to some of the individual companies in that respect.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Brett Fabry. I'm with Kodiak Robotics. And once again, I want to say, as others have said, is thank you very much for holding this process, both to CHP and DMV. This is a very worthwhile process. I'll just touch real quick on enhanced inspection process. It's a standard that was developed by CVSA. It's called the Enhanced Inspection Program. It was adopted in September of 2022. What that does is there's many CVSA inspections, but what this, most inspections involve a driver. So we had to develop an inspection that took out the driver portion. And so in that standard, a autonomous vehicle has a no defect, basically launch. So when it leaves a truck port, it has no defects. And then when it reaches its next destination, which needs to be within 24 hours, that truck will be inspected. It once again has to be no defects. Kodiak, right now, we've been testing that process in Texas with a bypass provider, and we've been able to show the transfer of data that shows when that vehicle was inspected and all the parameters that are within that that database. So we've been testing that process to transfer that information to law enforcement so that they can be assured that that's one of the safest vehicles on the roadway. Does that clarify that for you?
It does. Thank you.
Just one question.
Yes, sir.
From time to time, we'll conduct pre-clearance reviews where we send all trucks in, regardless of their transponder status. Well, the transponder should tell all trucks to come in. Is it anticipated that with an enhanced inspection, that truck would still continue to bypass on a pre-clearance review period?
So right now, that's one of the questions that we're working through with a new CVSA working group that was developed to answer a lot of these specific questions regarding the enhanced inspection program. Not only that question, but other questions regarding roadside inspections that have set up that are not permanent inspection facilities, along with timeframes of how long that inspection will be allowed, when those trucks have to be inspected before they launch. Is there a time frame? And then is the 24-hour period going to be the amount of time, or will it be longer, or will it be less? So those are questions that are hopefully going to be answered in the next workshop that the next working group that we're working with.
CVSA, correct?
Correct.
All right. Thanks.
And that workshop includes industry as well as regulators, both on the state and federal side, and also DOTs, as well as CVSA personnel.
Thank you.
Anything
Thank
else?
you, Mr. Fabry.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
So Sam Lesh with Lobby, just kind of wanted to echo some of the statements that were just made and have been made before, and also to the enhanced inspection process that you all know well. Just want to say as one developer's kind of commitment to engaging in using that process, and really want to highlight the piece that you all know, which is the fact that is an enhanced inspection, right, over current requirements, right? Having to do a much more detailed inspection once every 24 hours, I think also needs to be combined and compared to the realities that you actually see on the road, right? It's not just about what's in the regulatory text, it's about what drivers actually do or don't do, not on the unionized side, but on the non-unionized side as much as anything, right? Are they actually performing an actual pre-trip? Are they actually doing a post-trip inspection, right? Or are they just kind of going through the motions and not actually doing that? My company at least is very committed to documenting every part of an enhanced pre-trip. As soon as that standard is ready, we're trying to practice and go through those motions because we want to have that highest bar of actual mechanical and operational safety that we can. I mean, I think that goes back to the other broader safety discussions here as well, and just recognizing that as many amazing 20 and 30 year safe drivers that are in this room, that is not the entire universe of the driving population, as you all know well, right? You can have drivers who come out, especially nationally, they're coming from other states, coming into California, operating on the roads, that when there is a lack of a federal driver training requirement that doesn't even require you to have time behind the wheel before you actually get your CDL. You can easily have someone with a couple of weeks experience who's now driving almost coast to coast. Their only requirement is to meet that standard and be over 21 years of age, right? That is, safety is not kind of created equal. You have a very, very varying level of safety across, the driving population in my experience. And so for every incredibly safe driver you have out here, I think, probably drivers here will attest to, they see a lot of other incredibly unsafe drivers also out on the road too. So just keeping that holistic view of, what the actual, life on the road is, as I know, CHP kind of lives and breathes every single day. It's incredibly important to not just look at this, in a vacuum. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
I have one question, and maybe you can only speak to your affiliation, but any thoughts on what the regulations should say regarding the enhanced inspection documentation being available either to a terminal inspection or a basic inspection of terminal?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think we would be willing, look, as a company is really committed to doing the enhanced pre-trip, right, and keeping, documentation of the fact that we have done it. Would want to think through a little bit of the mechanics, right, about who would actually own it, right, as, we are also really envisioning building a product that's going to be used by our customers, right. We are going to be operating the trucks in the testing phase, but it'll come to actual deployment phase, right, someone else is going to be responsible for actually doing the operation. So, don't want to commit to other people's, actual standards there, but, from my company's perspective at least, fully support as much documentation as we could provide, to show that inspection actually occurred, that it met all of the standards, that there was no fudging, around the edges or anything like that. You would want to think about it a little bit more, but 100% committed to doing whatever we could do to give, your all's officers, the peace of mind to know that it was done, safely and meeting all the rules.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay. Any others?
Hello again, Mike Devaney, Sergeant at Arms, Teamsters Local 70. I just wanted to point out, we're talking about inspections. Obviously, the rule is the pre-trip inspection and the post-trip inspection. I do them every day. But the DOT also requires an en-route inspection. 50 miles after loading, I think every 150 miles after that, or every 3 hours, whichever comes first. And I don't know the mechanism for getting that done. That requires being in person, walking around, and we're not just talking the truck. This is more designed, the en-route is more designed for the load. I think it's important to take that into consideration, that unless DOT is going to change their regulations, there has to be a physical person there. Or, I don't know. I mean, but I'm just saying, it's currently how it's done. So I think it's important to take that into account. Thank you. That was all.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments on the inspection piece? Okay, interaction with law enforcement and first responders and emergency vehicles. Ms. Freelander and others have brought up the topic of how the current light-duty vehicles here in San Francisco have had some incidents with law enforcement and first responders. So it's a pertinent topic. If any of you have any comments about how we should consider things for our regulatory process, we invite you to the podium.
Thank you all very much. Again, Jeff Fair on behalf of Avia. I'll be brief here, and I know there are other companies that are more expert in this, but wanted to note that we do support adopting the law enforcement interaction plan requirements that are currently in place in the DMV regulations. These law enforcement interaction plan requirements have been adopted, as you all know, in numerous states that regulate autonomous vehicles, but California's LEIP requirements remain the most robust on a nationwide basis. The current regulations require that LEIPs include how to safely recognize that a vehicle is in autonomous mode. However, we would have concerns with requiring the ability to recognize when an AV is in autonomous mode while operating on the road, as opposed to when it is stopped. The ability to recognize that an AV is operating in autonomous mode could present public safety concerns if the public, pedestrians, or other drivers act differently around the autonomous vehicle when it is in autonomous mode. And again, safety is fundamental to this industry. We are trying to make for safer roads, and so that is the nature of our concerns, and would appreciate consideration. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Farrer. I've got a couple questions here. First of all, good to hear that you think California's law enforcement interaction plan is being used in other jurisdictions and viewed as the standard, if you will. The issue of being able to determine whether or not a vehicle is in autonomous mode while outside the vehicle. So I just want to make sure I'm clear. You feel that that ability should not be put in any type of regulatory structure, and from the standpoint of how others would interact with the vehicle. Is that correct?
Right. So what I'm getting at is while the vehicle is operating in autonomous mode, having that be an indicator would be a concern, because it would cause others in the universe, whether they're pedestrians, whether they are other drivers and whatnot, to behave differently, and that could cause public safety concerns that are there. And so that would be the discrete concern that we would have.
Okay, and contrast that with when the vehicle is disabled or stationary, you're in support of having some sort of indicator so that law enforcement and emergency responders would know at that point that the vehicle was in autonomous mode or currently is in some sort of autonomous mode.
That is correct.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
I have a question. Does it change your mind if it's dependent upon the SAE level of autonomy?
I would have to take that into account. I know that for our membership, we are an L4, L5 developer association, so that's the nature of our concerns, but we could certainly take that back and discuss it as an association.
That'd be great.
One more. On the LEIP, do you see any shortcomings in the current LEIP Or do you have any thoughts about how the LEIP could be utilized in a more effective fashion with law enforcement and first responders?
I don't have anything specific for you at this time. Again, to just reiterate that California is again, the most robust that we encounter on a nationwide basis. And so certainly happy to have a discussion with our members around possible additions in that regard.
Yeah, that wasn't fair for me to ask you that question on the spot while you're at the podium, but we would appreciate any input from that standpoint.
Happy to do it.
Okay. Any other comments?
Nat Buse from Aurora. I just wanted to maybe just mention two quick things. So one on the inspection thing. So it is a bit messy right now, I think, just for general purposes. Like the enhanced pre-trip is really just about more brakes and tires, right? And I think as a company who's actually using that, I think we found some interesting results that we're kind of working through right now to share with CVSA. So I think that's why, at least from our perspective, it might be a bit premature to just say, yes, put the stamp on that, because it's not sure kind of the how that value chain will play out. One of the things that wasn't maybe said very clearly is, trailers come to our facility, we hook them up through our driver, they go down the road, that kind of thing. So, the things around the trailer that have always been a problem in this country, the maintenance aspects of trailers, et cetera, I think we just need to be thoughtful around how we think of that in the context of this new technology. Maybe said differently, it's not clear to me that we should use this technology to solve the woes of what happens on the roads today with poorly maintained vehicles, having sat at roadside myself many hours. The other point about law enforcement, I want to separate out kind of maybe what we're seeing playing out in the streets of San Francisco with kind of how we think about the law enforcement interaction plan. So there is an AVSC best practice on that. Again, kind of, we know a lot more than we did 5 years ago. I think there's, again, a best practice there that might be informative to how we might think about it in the commercial vehicle sense. Of course, we do a lot today with law enforcement. We'll continue to do that. We're just not going to show up in someone's city and deploy without having those interactions and those conversations. And we actually make those available. And plus, our partners are asking for those same things as well. But with respect to like navigating into a scene that's an active scene, that's obviously a different thing. That has to do more with the performance and the safety aspects of what that vehicle is doing. And so I just want to make sure, as you all are thinking through that, you're kind of separating out, let's say, performance aspects of what should or should not happen versus kind of what the interaction should be after the fact, with a law enforcement person or whomever. But certainly from an Aurora perspective, those things should not be interfering with law enforcement's ability to do their job. And I just want to address the other thing about, this kind of testing. I don't think any company, I could be wrong and I don't want to speak for them, but like any company that has a driverless product today on the roads of San Francisco would actually call that testing. Again, I know we have this weird thing that seems like we need to get back to you all on kind of how you do that trigger from testing to deployment. And I think historically we've used compensation as that trigger. I think you've heard from a number of speakers, it just doesn't work in trucking in the same way. But it seems like we owe you all at least some ideas on how to make that delineation so that's a little bit more concrete. So appreciate the feedback on that very directly.
Okay. Thank you.
I do have one follow-up question.
Sure.
It's really probably from some of the previous speakers, but this idea of being able to law enforcement identify a vehicle that's in autonomous mode while it's in motion. I think the previous speaker indicated that they were not in favor of that. But since you're an actual OEM, what is your opinion of that? And can you give me some basis as to why you have the opinion you do?
Yeah, and not just an OEM, to be clear, like a safety guy who's been in this business for a long time and actually has run research projects on this very topic. The issue is that people do strange things to vehicles if they know that it's in a certain mode. Cut it off, jump in front of it, all sorts of interesting things, and sort of aggravating that condition with some sort of beacon or whatever you might think about that while the vehicle is in motion. At least as a safety guy, the data supports that. That's probably not the best thing to kind of integrate this technology in a way that's as seamless as we can make it and not have people do strange things around the vehicle. And again, I say people generally, like it's kind of we'll call it the 1%ers that we have to worry about. It's not the general public, but there are people, and studies have shown, that would go out there and sort of challenge the vehicle in a way that they would not do to a vehicle that was driven by a human, and create a hazard, not just for themselves, but for other road users on the road. We will have to design for that regardless. So this is not a question of whether we're going to like not design for somebody jumping in front of the truck and slamming on the brakes, but from a perspective of, as you all think about regulatory requirements, sort of embedding in the regulation that now this vehicle will be distinguished from other vehicles from here on out, just kind of creates that precedent now that everything from the vehicle being subject to more increased hijacking, right? That's a real thing that happens today with regular drivers. There are cases about this as well. You know, if it's seen that you can easily make these vehicles park on the side of the road or do whatever they need to do, and then people are stealing the cargo out of it or whatever may happen. I mean, I think these are issues that you all would need to think through. But again, the data does support, and studies have shown that, you know, if you delineate vehicles like that, people will do strange things. And again, these studies were limited, but it is true.
So along the line of data, which is interesting to me, do you have data that indicates how many of these interfering factors you've seen per 100,000 miles or per 10,000 miles? Do you have a ratio for us of how frequently this is happening?
We've just now started to incur some of these in recent months. I think we could get back to you as Aurora to see like what that rate was. But yes, there have been instances of other drivers challenging our vehicles in a way that is definitely unsafe.
I would just, and you don't have to answer it now because I think it's going to involve some follow-up, but if that's the case, and sometimes these apply more to certain SAE levels than others,
yeah.
And I know that the case is usually 4 and the goal being 5 at some point, but thinking in a case of like a 3 level or even a driver in a 4, we start getting into issues where we have to start thinking about it as law enforcement, especially if a violation is observed, really Fourth and Fifth Amendment type, I mean, civil rights types issues of what exactly we can know and ask and obtain. And so to prevent some of those conflicts, that's why, as the chief had mentioned, that having some type of indicator to just really alleviate those types of issues. So I would ask for thoughtful consideration from industry or developers that what exactly can be made known to law enforcement in the event that it needs to be made known. That's the question.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, right? Like, I think if this is a question of like, what does law enforcement need to know in some given moment? I think there are ways we can handle that. I think most people visualize, and maybe that's part of the challenge here, is most people visualize when the question's asked, like, should this vehicle be somehow badged differently? People are thinking, you know, giant decals on the trailer. Well, again, like, we don't own the trailer, so now we're going to be putting stuff on someone else's trailer, having to take it on and off, and all the things associated with that, or you put it on the cab, and then it's like, okay, what would happen when you put it on the cab, right? If you look at today, for example, the ABS light, I mean, it's a little small yellow light on the back of the trailer, partly for the reason for law enforcement to understand if the ABS is working or not without crawling all over the truck. I mean, if that is really like a thing that we need to talk through, I think we can talk about something like that. But again, I think context matters. Again, like if you're talking about some big beacon on the truck that says this is an autonomous vehicle, it just invites sort of mischief in a way that I think we can continue the smooth integration of this technology without that. Did that answer the question?
It does, and I think I would just, I'll conclude mine as just saying if it's not codified in the regulations, then how do we ensure that that's something that's able to be known?
Yeah, and I think on the the level 3 thing is a whole different discussion that we can talk about at some point if you want, and because it also applies to level 2 in some instances, and level 2 there is kind of clear ways to, at least once a crash happens, to kind of find out what that system and what mode it was in and all that kind of stuff, and I think the same would apply to a level 3. The one quick thing I was going to say, because no one said it and I'm really surprised, is as you all are thinking through the requirements for test drivers, and again, knowing a lot more that we know today than we know 3-4 years ago, just please think through the equity issues. I would hate to have us end up in a situation where we kind of remove a whole swath of potential workers for, we'll call them minor issues in the context of creating an imbalance on the equity side of things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, are there any other comments with regard to law enforcement? Okay, hearing none, we're at the home stretch. We'd like to hear comments about any anticipated economic impacts on a possible regulatory proposal. So economic impacts being on businesses that are centered around heavy-duty vehicles, jobs, revenue generation, things of that nature. So welcome you to the podium for your comments.
Again, thank you. Jeff Farah with Avia. I appreciate the opportunity to speak about this important subject. There are numerous benefits of autonomous trucking, and I won't reiterate all of them since Avia spoke at them at the DMV's previous workshop in January. However, I do want to highlight a few of the economic and workforce benefits that AV trucking will bring to California. AV trucks will help grow California's economy by creating jobs and growing the economy. We understand and appreciate concerns with workforce impact of autonomous vehicles, but widespread deployment of AV trucking will not cause immediate widespread displacement of drivers. This has been confirmed by US DOT studies. In fact, AV truck deployments offer an opportunity to mitigate the driver truck shortage we're experiencing right now. The AV industry is currently leveraging the existing workforce to create new roles for different education and skill levels. Many of the jobs created will not require a college degree, such as service technicians, vehicle safety drivers, remote assistance operators, mapping data collectors, delivery packers, and many more. Moreover, some AV developers expect to deploy their technology on long-haul trucking lanes using a transfer hub model, which would create new opportunities for Californians at logistics facilities, as well as increasing demand for human short-haul drivers to move goods on the first and last mile. Local workers with experience in the trucking industry specifically, particularly as truck drivers, offer valuable skills to the AV trucking employers that you've heard from today. Unfortunately, the U.S. trucking industry is currently short an estimated 78,000 truck drivers. This is set to double by 2031. AV truck deployments can help mitigate this shortage by supporting innovation and making necessary steps. The research is clear that autonomous trucks will increase real GDP and welfare. California is not currently a testing ground, as you know, for autonomous trucking, but this is going on in Texas. There is more information I realize I'm short on time here, that has come out from TxDOT that we can provide to all of you that speaks to a lot of the economic benefits, some of the workforce issues. But I do want to emphasize as a final point that we want to make sure you all understand that this is something that's going to be gradual in the state of California over time. These gradual supply chain efficiencies for California businesses and consumers will come from the productivity enhancements, fleet flexibility, and travel time savings of long-haul trucking in autonomous vehicles brings. We do not expect major economic benefits to accrue until at least a year after the regulations are implemented, given the time it takes to establish commercial partnerships, plan for operations, acquire necessary permits, and operate on the state's roads.
Thank you, Mr. Farah. You mentioned about the job creation and the economic benefits of heavy-duty AVs. Does your organization have any research numbers that you'd be able to share with us so that we could have that information as part of what we would consider?
We can absolutely provide that. That is not industry research that our association has conducted ourselves, but there is academic research, there is federal government research, there is state-level research that I mentioned in Texas that I think could inform this process.
Okay, thank you very much.
Are there any anticipated costs to industry that these regulations would have that are not already being incurred by industry?
I would suspect that is the case, though I think it would depend upon the scope of what we're talking about, and that's certainly something that we can consider, but I would imagine that's the case.
I guess I would say if you do anticipate there would be costs, I would be intrigued to know what those are or what you anticipate those that you're not already incurring.
Okay. We can absolutely take that back, but thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good morning. Peter Leroy-Munoz with the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Just to put a finer point on some of the items that were just raised and to the question, at the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, we actually commissioned a white paper specifically looking at the macroeconomic and labor impacts of long-haul trucking in California. We did that in conjunction with Victoria University, a university that had looked at similar issues for the Federal Department of Transportation. So we have that information, happy to provide it to you. the very high-level findings show that there's going to be a net increase of about $6.5 to $8 billion a year to California's economy annually as a result of AV trucking. The faster that AV trucking is adopted leads to a faster and greater accrual of that economic benefit. With regard to the labor impacts, the study also considered what those might be, and it showed that as a result of the long-haul trucking in California that's autonomous, there would actually be a net increase of 2,400 jobs throughout the state. And in terms of impact to long-haul truck drivers themselves, they found that under simulations of a slower or moderate speed adoption of that technology, that there would be no job loss. With regard to a faster adoption of that technology, there would be a limited period of job loss, but that would then flatten out. And this is given the fact that it would be mitigated by a natural turnover of drivers within the industry, as well as recognizing there's already a present shortage of long-haul drivers, and that there would be an increase in demand for short-haul trucking. So all of those factors kind of play into the results that we see. I should also note as well that the fast adoption speed, that scenario is actually not even technically possible because that assumed adoption of this technology by 2021. And so obviously that did not happen. So happy to provide that report to all of you. I've already provided it to others within the agency, but I'm happy to provide that as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, I appreciate seeing that report.
Great, will do. Thank you.
Questions? Okay, thank you.
Once again, Aiden Ali Sullivan representing Waymo. Definitely appreciate the opportunity to talk about the economic impacts of the technology. One thing I want to be very clear on here is really identifying that distinction between the immediate and short-term impacts as well as the much further longer-term impacts of the technology. Assuming that there's a regulatory path forward, there obviously would be a process of testing and development for new expansion of operations here in California. As a new potential business line in California, there's a ramp-up period with incremental infrastructure, hiring, operational investments as we grow those testing operations. Based on the direct experience in the light-duty space over the last decade that we've had, as well as our current trucking testing operations in Texas over the last few years, we would anticipate that in the short term, that process would be incremental. Now, once heavy-duty autonomous trucks are commercially deployed throughout California, we expect to see tremendous positive benefits to the state over the long term, which would spill into other adjacent industries as well. This includes creating greater efficiencies within the supply chain, which will help reduce costs of goods to everyday consumers throughout the state. Additionally, we anticipate billions of dollars of investment within the AV heavy-duty industry to be made in the state that would span infrastructure, operations, and workforce investments. Now, lacking the ability to even conduct driverless testing within the state, though, all of that potential economic impact and benefits, they currently are and really risk continuing to be realized in other neighboring states. As far as jobs, as I've highlighted before, we anticipate several new roles to emerge as part of heavy-duty operations here in California, and we anticipate CDL drivers as well as testing operators, maintenance, mechanical staff at our depots, other folks that would support the trucking activities, as well as staff for general operations and support roles throughout the state of California for trucking operations.
Thank you very much. We got a question?
One question, follow-up. You mentioned a ramp-up. Can you generally talk about what that time frame looks like? Just generally speaking, I mean, you mentioned ramping up an incremental approach.
Sure. I think that time period really depends on sort of the regulatory process and what that potentially looks like. The ability to secure the necessary permits, the ability to do the mapping work, the ability to do all of the infrastructure development that we would need to do in order to have our commercial operations, building partnerships with third parties. So that ramp-up period really depends on what a potential rulemaking process looks like and what those steps that a company would have to go through. I can say that on the light-duty side, that it has been, I believe, close to, well, regulations were passed in 2012, or law was passed in 2012, regulations in 16 to allow for light-duty operations. We are just now at the point of looking at commercial operations in the state of California. So as you can tell, it's been it's close to well, close to 10 years of process to get to the point for commercial operations. Ideally, that process would be shorter on a potential heavy-duty side now that we and the department has learned a lot through that process, but it is likely a multi-year process for that ramp-up period, Miguel.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks.
Okay. Mr. Ali Sullivan, I do have a follow-up question. You mentioned because heavy-duty vehicles are prevented from being tested at this point within California, but they are in others, they're allowed in other states. Do you see the economic benefits in those other states that you had mentioned at this time?
I have seen the economic impact of my activities in those states. Yes, I can speak to what that, well, I would be happy to share some of that information with you, but yes, there has been direct economic impact on the part of our company in other states based on the trucking operations and testing that we have, yes.
If you can share that, that would be helpful. Thank
Sure.
you. Okay, thank you very much.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I really didn't expect to speak at all. I stuck it out longer than a lot of my Teamsters friends did. They don't have a lot of faith in these kind of systems. But at my age, I've sat through many of these types of workshops. I represent employees in the public sector for Teamsters, some of which work for transit agencies, so I understand a lot about commercial driver's licenses and the need for them. But I heard a few things that made me start to boil inside, and I wanted to come up and say them.
Okay. Sir, I didn't get your name.
Mark Leach,
Mark
Teamsters
Leach. Thank you.
856 business representative. Humans are challenging. There was a comment about humans challenging the vehicles in the roadway. They're doing this because this industry is challenging their livelihoods. Tens of thousands of middle-class families are watching their economic demise unfold in front of them. We watched Uber and Lyft undermine the taxi medallion system, and now taxi driver families have been forever economically damaged. DMV, the state, and our communities need this revenue from the license fees. We watched electric cars not paying gas taxes, right? Who's going to pay for all the infrastructure that these companies are enjoying, that these companies are using their technology to enrich? Companies that are going to embrace this technology. The industry reps have said jobs will be created. That may be so, but history shows they won't be the same quality, well-paid, well-benefited jobs. Somebody just said you don't need education, right? You won't need a college degree for many of these jobs. Well, that's true, but guess what? When you have education, when a job requires education, you get paid more. I challenge these companies to embrace and not fight the unionization of their employees in their companies, like we've seen from these other parts of the autonomous and shared economy industries, the Ubers and Lyfts and Airbnbs out there claiming that people aren't actually employees. I challenge them to embrace, give their workers good wages, treat them well, give them benefits, treat them like the human beings that they are. Because I've watched in this state the different propositions that have gone through the elected officials that we try to influence to change the decisions that corporations are shoving through on us. And this is not going to end well. Some people will be happy, the haves will have more, and the have-nots numbers will rise. So I'm glad I stuck it out to the end because I saw that item number 5 about economic impacts and the effect on jobs, humans. The reason we're all here, humans.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Louis Diaz, Principal Officer of Teamsters Local 948 from Visalia and Modesto. I'm here on behalf of the 6,000 members from our local. And just the fact about the impact on the economics, I mean, I just use common sense. For every autonomous vehicle out there, it's one less driver, one less tax-paying citizen, one less person that will not be able to provide for his family. And I'm just using common sense. On the other topics that were talked about, just one point. If the traffic court usually add points when you commit violations, I guess what you can get and log into your internet and check about all the mistakes that automatic vehicles have caused, How many chances are they going to get? I'm 55 years old, and since I've been 18 years old, I got my driver's license, and for every mistake I make, I pay for it. How many mistakes are they going to be allowed? And they're not going to be accountable for. Are they going to keep making over and over and over and over until they test and try to get all, the little flicks out of their computers? And in the meantime, it could be serious out there. And that's what we're talking about. It's just the common sense. Just the other day, I was driving out on the freeway, and out of nowhere, this one vehicle got out of the way, and the bucket was right in the middle of the freeway, and it ended up getting under my vehicle. Luckily, it went under, but I saw that bucket under my rearview mirror swerving around, and I saw all these vehicles just trying to get out of it. I don't know how the automatic vehicle is going to react on that, but there's a lot of unknowns. And until we get to that point, I think there should be someone inside that cabin. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you.
Again, Ariel Wolf with California Alliance for Freight Innovation. Let me just take a little bit of time at the end here to talk about the human cost as well. On this topic of the economic benefits and the costs, everything that's been said is very important. It's salient with respect to jobs. But one thing that we haven't talked a lot about today, and it's mentioned a little bit, is the baseline of safety. What's the human cost right now? Autonomous trucks are prohibited from operation in any way in California. So what does the current situation look like without any autonomous trucks? In 2021, 4,714 people died in large truck crashes in the country. That's a 17% increase from 2020. 17% increase. 16% of those were truck occupants. 68% were occupants of cars, of other passenger cars, and 15% were pedestrians and cyclists. I believe this is NHTSA FARS data. Just a little bit more perspective, 50%, that number is 50% higher for truck fatalities than in 2009. 50% higher. So the baseline without any autonomous trucks at all is that we've had a 50% increase in truck fatalities. Does anyone think that that's acceptable? I think from a human cost perspective, that's what we should be focusing on. Now, just a quick note on California itself. Traffic fatalities increased 7.6%, as I understand it, from 2020 to 2021, 3,980 to 4,285. I'm getting these wrong. We can correct it, but I'm just putting it forward. The baseline, again, without any of this technology, is an epidemic of violence and death. So the question is, that I think we have to wrestle with is, should we be doing everything possible to try and address that epidemic? And does this technology help with that? Does it have the potential to help with that? If it does, then it's incumbent upon everyone to be working towards getting that technology safely tested and deployed as soon as possible. That's the obligation we have as a society. There are a lot of other impacts, a lot of other things we have to consider, and very important considerations that the DMV, the CHP, and all of the applicable agencies need to be focused on. We are ready to engage in all of that, partner with it, but we need to be laser focused on addressing that crisis, and that's what this technology, in part, is here to do. Many other solutions out there that have been proposed in other contexts, and I would venture to say we support all of those, many of those as well. But we can't leave this technology, if it has the potential to do it, on the side. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
One question, a follow-up. Should there be some type of part of the regulation that has I don't know if the supposition is that be at least to the level we're at with the statistics that you discussed, or that should there be some type of reduction? Should the regulations attempt to even deal with that?
Well, that's the kind of thing that gets proven over time. I'll say this, it's so important because, right, we want to make sure it's having an impact on those numbers. The hardest thing, as I've been told, to measure, you look at NHTSA, is near misses, right? Like what hasn't happened. We don't know been raised about the ride-hail situation in San Francisco and all of the deployment that's occurring there. We can't measure every time someone's taken a driverless ride home from a bar relative to grabbing the keys and driving themselves. We just can't measure that. So that's the kind of thing that has to be looked at over time. Should it be a benchmark? I think the industry expects it to be, overall, the kind of thing that they're measuring themselves against. They're trying to make the roads safer. But that's a very complex question. All we know is that the current situation without this technology is totally unacceptable. And what we're starting to see with limited deployments around the country is that there are no serious injuries. The fault, when they get into crashes or incidents, it's overwhelmingly determined to be the fault of the human driver. So you have indicia at this point in time that starts to show this technology is making the roads safer, so we want to make sure we can scale that in a way that starts to address the crisis that we have.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Sam Lesh with Wabi, not to beleaguer some of the points, but echoing what some of my colleagues said, but just want to highlight something I think that hasn't been said, which is the existing status of the freight industry in general. The driver shortage, as not only what it is today, but what it is projected to become, especially over the next 10 years, is also not without consequence, right? I think you all heard it in the previous workshop about farmers and other people having their fruits rotting on the loading docks because they can't get someone to come and pick it up. Inefficiencies of the supply chain don't just kind of exist, in the ether. Right? They actually have impacts on mom and pop businesses, on big businesses as well, and that's not just padding the corporate bottom line. That impacts their ability to give wages and raises to other workers in their facilities, as well as the ability to hire in the future. I think some of the studies that you'll see that my colleagues will send to you as well also show, including the SVLG study, show that the backbone of this idea that it's not going to actually create job losses because you also need to fill that driver shortage, right? There are routes that are not being serviced by truck or are being serviced inefficiently by truck right now that we see, at least at Wabi, as an autonomy being a solution to help actually fill that need to move freight from point A to point B. That this just wanted to highlight that the current status quo doesn't exist in a vacuum, and these are really important economic benefits that we can help address. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, are there any other comments? Okay, are there any comments about suggestions for regulatory language? Okay, that being said, we've had quite a bit of discussion this morning about safety, about qualifications. Really appreciate the input and the dialogue. This has been very helpful for both the DMV and the CHP. So on behalf of my colleagues at the table, I'd like to thank you all for the fruitful discussion. If you have any further thoughts or ideas after today, including suggestions for regulatory text, I encourage you to send an email to us, again, at autonomousvehicles, one word, autonomousvehicles@dmv.ca.gov, and we will we'll consider those. Thank you again for your thoughts and inputs and the robust discussion today. We'll be compiling the comments and taking this back for further consideration as we determine our next steps. We may be having additional workshops to gather more information, and if so, we will be notifying you as we did for today's. If we move forward with the regulations, we will follow the rulemaking provisions of the California Administrative Procedures Act, which includes a formal public comment period and public hearing where comments can be provided on the draft regulations. So with that, I thank you again for your time and consideration, and we hope you all have a good day and a good weekend. Thank you again.